Chapter 2976 Fighting for the Core of the Dimension. Chapter 2976 Fighting for the Core of the Dimension. 2976 Fighting for the Core of the Dimension. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains laughed coldly as he struck out once more. All the 7 tiers from the Genesis world of the last era were here now. And with just Lin Luo and Bai Fan, how could they be stopped? Ling Han was a dead man. Lin Luo struck, but was blocked by Heavenly Venerate Chong Yen. Meanwhile, Bai Fan's blow was stopped by Heavenly Venerate Big Dipper. Who else was there? 1. A figure appeared out of nowhere, punching back at Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' giant hand, and causing it to disintegrate immediately. This was another 7th tier? Yes, it was Xian Fu. Ling Han was shocked. Why would Xian Fu help him? Back in the realm battlefield, Xian Fu had always accused him of being a traitor. Moreover, Ling Han was an old rival of Xian Chihu. As such, Xian Fu was the least likely 7th tier to help him out. However, events did turn out as such, and Xian Fu actually was helping Ling Han out at a very crucial time. Xian Fu! Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains barked angrily. He never understood him all this while. Xian Fu had clearly been antagonistic to Ling Han on the surface, yet he was helping them out time and again. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains was utterly confused. Xian Fu smiled. A moment has passed. Should you all not be returning now? Humph, if I don't kill that brat, I swear that I am less than a man. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains declared. It was absolutely humiliating for him to have had his doppelganger destroyed by Ling Han. Die! He struck out, but this time he wasn't sending a palm strike from afar, he was directly going after Ling Han. Chong Yen guarded against Lin Luo, Big Dipper guarded against Bai Fan, and Half Moon guarded against Xian Fu. Who else was there to save Ling Han? Let me have a go at it! A cheerful laughter resounded as a slender figure appeared out of nowhere, and charged straight at Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains. Boom! Both sides struck out, generating a terrifying energy shock wave from the clash. The mystery person flew backwards from the blast, but Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' blow was stopped as well. Who was this person? Everyone looked at the figure, and couldn't help revealing expressions of shock. Soon, their surprise was replaced with a sense of astonishment and excitement. What did it mean for Zhou Heng to be able to stop this blow? It meant that he was now a 7th tier. Otherwise, no matter how strong a 6th tier could be, there was no stopping an attack from a 7th tier. It was clear that Zhou Heng had just broken through to the 7th tier, which was why his power was weaker. However, 7th tiers were indestructible, so what did it matter if his power was weaker? Even though everyone knew it was a matter of time before Zhou Heng would break through to the 7th tier, they were still shocked to see that he had actually done it. Another 7th tier was born to the Genesis world. This was naturally something to rejoice about. So what if you've broken through to the 7th tier? I can still defeat you with one hand, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains said coldly. He wasn't lying. Even though 7th tiers were indestructible, there was still a great difference in strength. What if I join the mix then? Chu Hao's voice echoed as he slowly approached. His body was wrapped in flames, just like an invincible being. You broke through to the 7th tier as well. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' expression finally changed. He had never expected this to happen. In just a little over 10 billion years, there were 2 who broke through to the 7th tier outside of his knowledge. Chu Hao smiled and said, Senior brother Zhou and I are but newly inducted juniors in front of friend Shatter Mountains. This is why we've so boldly decided to team up and receive some teachings from friend Shatter Mountains. Shatter Mountains' Heavenly Venerate's expression was gloomy. If it was just Zhou Heng or Chu Hao, he would be confident of defeating them easily. The problem was that there were 2 of them now. Even though both of them had just broken through to the 7th tier, and their battle prowess had yet to reach the peak, their strength was still at an equal rank with his. How could he possibly take such a situation lightly? Can I still kill Ling Han? Difficult. Much too difficult. All he wanted was to kill a puny little fourth tier. Why did it have to be so hard? Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains no longer attacked. Even though they still had a slight advantage on the surface, it was only a matter of time before Wu Jihong and Heavenly Venerate Blood Rainbow would show up as well. They were the ones who would be at a disadvantage by then. As such, it didn't matter if they continued to attack or not. Shwa! At this moment, a massive black figure appeared out of nowhere, bringing forth an indescribable pressure. Hysteria! There were only 2 7th tiers fighting against Hysteria then. How could they possibly stop the number 1 elite? Hysteria's intent was clear. It wanted to eliminate every single person present with a single blow. This was no bold claim. Hysteria was much too powerful. If there was another tier above the 7th tier, then that would make Hysteria an 8th tier. The only reason Hysteria was momentarily stopped was because 7th tiers had an indestructible body, and could use superior numbers to their advantage. Everyone else posed no threat at all, so who could stop Hysteria? Lin Luo and the other 7th tiers all shouted as they attacked the giant tentacle. Pun! As both sides clashed, a terrible energy storm erupted. That was not something even a 6th tier could get involved in, and they all hurriedly escaped the chaos. Ultimately, Hysteria's attack was blocked. Ling Han witnessed everything with his own eyes, and couldn't contain his shock. He had a rough idea of how powerful a 7th tier was, and yet even with 10 of them joining hands, it was only enough to block a single blow from Hysteria. Hysteria was simply too powerful. It was no wonder that the coalition army was consistently beaten back by it. Boom, boom, boom. The intense battle erupted, and Hysteria exerted its full force, with nothing to be concerned about. Against such an elite, not even Ling Han could muster up any resistance. The best he could do was run as far away as he could from the center of the battle. Wu Jihong and Heavenly Venerate Blood Rainbow had also arrived by then, and all 12 7th tiers joined hands to combat Hysteria. Under the terrifying explosions, the final vestiges of the Flaming Frost Realm were soon ripped to pieces as well. A bright light suddenly shone, illuminating the cold dark world. The core of the dimension. Everyone was taken aback at first, but they soon came to their senses. Before this, it had been near impossible for one to get close to the core of a transcendent dimension, as it would be able to manipulate the entirety of the energy of heaven and earth. This was much too terrifying. Even though a 7th tier had an indestructible body, there were still limits to their strength, and they would be blocked outside. But now, the Flaming Frost Realm was practically gone. So what if the core of the dimension was still here? There was nothing for it to work with anymore. And since it couldn't manipulate the energy of heaven and earth, it could only be used to nourish the strength of cultivators. Naturally, even though the core of the dimension was in a weakened state, it was still not something anyone could get close to. They had to be a Heavenly Venerate at least, otherwise they would be crushed to bits instantly by the intense energy. Take it. Everyone clearly knew that their objective here was the core of the dimension. Now that the treasure was in sight, why would they still need to be courteous? The fight for the core of the dimension began. No matter who it was, they were going all out to try and escape with the core of the dimension. However, the energy storms here had formed a natural barrier. Moreover, the area around it was in complete chaos. Everyone could only watch in vain as the ball of light danced in the air, unable to get close. Naturally, Ling Han was pulling all the stops to take it as well. Rightfully, there shouldn't be anyone to contend with him. However, Chongyan, Shatter Mountains, and the rest were still out to get him, and would launch an attack at him from time to time. Even though they weren't seriously attacking, how could Ling Han possibly risk taking it lightly? As the chaos ensued, a black figure appeared out of nowhere. Bang, bang, bang. Wherever she went, the people nearby instantly burst into bits. 6th tiers were also no exception. She charged straight at the core of the dimension with no one able to stop her. Chapter 2977 2977 Fragments. Chapter 2977 2977 Fragments. 2977 Fragments. Ling Han's eyes instantly narrowed. That was Jue Huo. Who would have thought that she would suddenly appear at this time after disappearing for so many years? She was obviously already a 7th tier, so what was the point of seeking a dimensional core? 7th tier, the pinnacle of the world. Even if she were to obtain the most precious thing in the world, it would be impossible for her to advance any further. Hysteria was so impressive and awesome because it was too unique, having manifested as a dimension, which was why it had the ability to suppress 7th tier elites. Even if others wanted to give up their living bodies and become a dimension as well, it would be impossible. What was a 7th tier fighting for the dimensional core for? However, such a move by Jue Huo immediately made her a target. All the 7th tiers, including Hysteria, attacked her. Even though Jue Huo, being a 7th tier, was immortal and indestructible, when faced with attacks from so many 7th tiers, she could only be sent flying. However, the force of her grab had already shot out, smashing into the dimension core. Pung, how astonishing was the strength of a 7th tier. Without the protection of a dimension, the dimension core appeared incomparably fragile, exploding with a single strike. Shio, shio, shio. Countless fragments shot out in all directions. Some were as big as fists, while others were smaller than grains of rice. This scene was extremely unexpected, but it only took an instant for everyone to fly out and chase after the core fragments. What, it's you! When Chong Yan and the other 7th tiers of the older generation looked at Jue Huo, all of them revealed shocked expressions. For 7th tier ultimate elites, so what if the heavens collapsed and the earth split apart, or the universe was destroyed? They were indestructible and immortal, so they would always remain calm and collected. Even if Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' doppelganger had been destroyed by Ling Han, there would only be boundless anger. But now, the 5 ultimate elites all looked as if they had seen a ghost. This was too rare. Extermination! They cried out in disbelief. What? Ling Han was flying out in pursuit of a dimensional core fragment, but when he heard these 5 people's exclamations, he almost stumbled and fell. Jue Huo was extermination? Was this possible? If Jue Huo was extermination, then what was the present hysteria? And if Jue Huo was not extermination, would all 5 7th tier ultimate elites recognize the wrong person at the same time? Boom! Jue Huo didn't reply. She only responded with a terrifying attack. Loud explosions rang out one after another, and Ling Han couldn't hear anything. He could naturally charge back and listen to the following conversation, but how could he have the time to do so now? In just an instant, Ling Han put aside his curiosity and continued to chase after the dimensional core fragment that had bounced away in front of him. He had to race against time. There were simply too many competitors here. As long as he slowed down a bit, it was guaranteed that he would not be able to obtain anything. Chase. Ling Han's speed was extremely high, but that core fragment had been sent flying by a 7th tier, and its initial speed far surpassed his. In an instant, it had already disappeared from his field of vision, leaving Ling Han with no choice but to chase after it by following the trajectory of its flight. Behind him, the battle among 7th tier ultimate elites was currently unfolding with great vigor, and for the time being, no one had the time to spare. Ling Han traveled for half a day before the dimension core fragment finally appeared in front of him. It was only the size of a fist, and its light radiated brilliantly in the vacuum, making it very conspicuous. Obviously, its speed had slowed down. Otherwise, how could Ling Han possibly catch up to it? Just a little more. Ling Han continued to give chase. He was only about 9 meters away when, shwa, a dark whip-like shadow suddenly whisked towards him. This was Hysteria's doppelganger. Humph, I'm not afraid of you now, Ling Han said calmly as he clenched his fist and punched out towards his opponent. In the past, he had encountered Hysteria's doppelganger several times, and he had fled in a miserable state each time. However, now that his battle prowess was already at the peak stage of 6th tier, he naturally had nothing to fear. Pun! Ling Han punched at the whip-like shadow, and a terrifying power instantly rebounded back, causing his body to pause for a moment. However, Hysteria's tentacle was also trembling violently, and was similarly in a tough situation. Ling Han took a deep breath. After all, this was hysteria. Even if it was just a doppelganger, it was no weaker than him. Let's fight! His fighting spirit surged. After so many years of cultivation, he finally no longer had to fear hysteria even if it was just one of its doppelgangers. Pun pun pun. He was engaged in a fierce battle with hysteria's tentacle. All 7th grade seals were being channeled. He had to kill hysteria's doppelganger as soon as possible and snatch the dimensional core fragment. Otherwise, who knew what would happen? Ling Han went all out, and with the enhancement of the heavenly venerable seals, his strength instantly soared by 2,000 times, and the dimensions in his body were all released, reaching as many as about 1,000. Such battle prowess was truly terrifying, and he was definitely the number one below the 7th tier. Facing such a powerful Ling Han, even hysteria was no match for him. This doppelganger was quickly destroyed. Ling Han put away the dimensions and stopped channeling the heavenly venerable seals. He once again started to chase after the dimension core fragment. He quickly caught sight of another person chasing over from a certain distance on the side, and his target was the core fragment ahead of him. A competitor? Ling Han was unafraid. As long as one wasn't a 7th tier, no one could compete with him. When this person got closer, Ling Han revealed killing intent. That was Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows. Among the people who wanted to interrogate him for colluding with the enemy, the 10,000 Shadows, Golden Silk Moth, and Yu Borong were the ones who danced the most happily. Now, Yu Borong had already been killed by him, and Ling Han had no intention of letting the Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows off the hook. Of course he had to take revenge. What was there to be polite about? The core fragment in front of him was already nearly within his reach. Ling Han stretched out his hand to grab it, and put it away thereafter. Hand over, Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows called out from behind, but when he discovered that the person in front of him was Ling Han, he turned around and left without another word. This was truly decisive. Ling Han was astounded. He hadn't expected the 10,000 Shadows to be so cowardly. However, when Ling Han thought about it again, he had sent Feng Wuding flying with a single strike. There was no one else with such abilities. The 10,000 Shadows clearly knew that Ling Han was so powerful, so how could it be that he would come over to court death? It wasn't like he and Ling Han were good friends. Being able to advance to 6th tier, how was it possible that he could not take things as they came? Moreover, this was only one of the core fragments. It wasn't as if there was no chance at all if he couldn't obtain this fragment. A 6th tier was extremely fast, and the 10,000 Shadows moved very swiftly, not giving Ling Han any chance to pursue him at all. A smile gradually appeared on the corners of Ling Han's lips. So what if he ran away? As long as he had 7th tier battle prowess, wouldn't killing 10,000 Shadows be a matter within arm's reach? Brat! With a furious roar, the sky shattered, and a terrifying power surged over Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains. He was actually charging over towards him. Old man! Ling Han cursed inwardly. This old fellow didn't go and properly deal with hysteria, but actually came to deal with him specifically? How narrow-minded. However, he immediately tore a rip into the void without the slightest hesitation. As long as he had 7th tier battle prowess, he would be able to enter the depths of the Genesis world of the last era and obtain an endless amount of great herbs, allowing his cultivation level to rapidly advance to the 6th tier, or even 7th tier. At that time, beating up Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains would naturally be child's play. Let's go. Ling Han was also extremely decisive, and immediately fled into the void. Very quickly, he used the powers of dimension in his body to guide him back to the profound negative realm. Chapter 2978 2978 5th tier. Chapter 2978 2978 5th tier. 2978 5th tier. Ling Han sought the Empress and Hu Niu to tell them that he would be going into seclusion. As he would not leave until he was at the 5th tier, he naturally had to inform them of his absence. After that, he began his cultivation. He took out the dimensional core fragment, and placed his hand on top of it. Immediately he felt a strange wave of power radiating from it. Pun pun pun. The core trembled greatly, warping the sight before Ling Han's eyes. His surroundings quickly darkened until there was nothing but countless stars. Fundamental particles. However, Ling Han was already in possession of 3 fundamental particles. As these fundamental particles completely rejected all the others, their bodies were crystal clear, while the other 3 were blurry, and could neither be seen nor touched. It was difficult to go from the 4th tier to the 5th tier in the first place. This rang true even for the greatest prodigy of all eternity like Ling Han. He calmed himself down and started using the dimensional core to resonate with the other 3 fundamental particles to make them clearer. The speed of progression was extremely low, but there was no helping it. Ling Han was only able to obtain a fragment of the dimensional core. Even though it was a rather big piece, it was still far from a complete core. However, Ling Han was confident in his abilities. All he needed was a catalyst. He let go of his pride and ego. Thanks to the relatively mundane life he had over the past several 100 million years, Ling Han was able to quiet his mind. Time slowly passed. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. Ling Han let go of all worldly attachments as he bonded with the dimensional core and resonated with heaven and earth. In a flash, 900 million years had flown by. The dimensional core in Ling Han's hand no longer emitted any light. It was just a fragment to begin with, and with its energy depleted, it had become nothing more than an ordinary rock. However, Ling Han was still immersed in his contemplation on a deeper level. The dimensional core had already served its intended purpose. Now, it was up to Ling Han to do what he could. Each advancement for a heavenly venerate could be difficult, or it could be easy. Some would not be able to advance a single step even after spending epochs trying, whereas others could make that monumental leap after just sensing one of these fundamental particles. In Ling Han's mind, the 3 originally blurry fundamental particles had become much clearer. However, they were still dormant. Ling Han wanted to take control of all 3 fundamental particles in a single breath, but that was not realistic. If he truly had such intentions, he would only end up with nothing. As such, he chose one of the particles, and began resonating with it much more deeply. Time passed once more as the particle became even clearer in his mind. In fact, it was almost in reach. It's time! Ling Han opened his eyes. 1. Energy surged around him, as though it had taken a physical form. Guided with both hands, a mysterious power instantly fused into his body. Boom! Ling Han's body changed drastically. Even though it was just a tiny vestige, it was enough to bring about a qualitative change. This was because it was the fundamental power of the 4th particle. Receive particle. Ling Han didn't end his cultivation there, as being able to sense the 4th fundamental particle was only the first step. His strength still had not undergone a qualitative change. He calmed himself and extracted more energy from the received particle to train his physique. With the cultivation level broken through, Ling Han's energy capacity surged as well, and he was now able to contain even more energy. He was now able to store over 10,000 realms. At this stage, he could refine every dimension he had inside his body into a high-level dimension, but he would need time, a near boundless length of time. Perhaps these dimensions could only reach their peak after several hundred epochs. And this was only for a high-level dimension. What about the transcendent dimensions? Perhaps they would never be able to reach such heights. After another 700 million years, Ling Han finally stopped. He stood up with absolute confidence. Now that he had a 7th tier's battle prowess, he was virtually unbeatable. It was time to save his son and daughter. As soon as Ling Han came out of his cultivation, the Empress and Huo rushed over in joy. Ling Han, you've succeeded? Huo asked. Ling Han nodded and said, I'm going to go rescue Jianxue and Xie. Wait for me here. The 2 women nodded. Even Huo was not being willful now. They knew that even though Ling Han now possessed a 7th tier's battle prowess, he still didn't have the immortal physique of the 7th tier. Against Chong Yan and Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains, he was still at a disadvantage. As such, they didn't want to add to Ling Han's problems. Ling Han immediately set off to Western Cloud's heaven. The distance was very far, but to a 7th tier, as long as it was within the same realm, it was simply the matter of a few steps no matter how far. In less than an hour, Ling Han arrived in the vicinity. After that, there was the 100 Frost Valley. The ground here was covered in a dense layer of snow, and what was strange about this place was that there was white snow and black snow. There was even red snow. Looking from the sky, the place was like a piece of brocade, and was extremely colorful. The 100 Frost Valley was still quite a big area. Ling Han emitted his divine sense, but he was extremely careful, and had to slowly spread his divine sense out. There was surely a 7th tier guarding this place, and it was best to avoid startling the enemy if he could help it, as this was a rescue operation. After rescuing everyone, he would head to the Genesis world of the last era and dig up more great herbs so that he could reach the 6th tier as soon as possible. Once he did, he would be able to suppress even 7th tiers. Found them. Ling Han quickly locked in on several auras which had a resonance with his bloodline. He moved silently, and he came upon a gloomy valley where dozens of people were sitting cross-legged in the span of a few breaths. Ling Jianxue, Ling Shi, Fu Tianqing, Rain Emperor, Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, and the large black dog. They were all his descendants, disciple, comrades, and friends. Even though they were trapped, they clearly didn't give up, and persisted in their cultivation. Even those like Ling Shi and Fu Tianqing had advanced further despite their late start, and reached the 4th tier, while Ling Jianxue was at the 3rd tier, and Ling Fifan at the 2nd tier. It was truly astonishing to have so many heavenly venerates under the same clan. The Rain Emperor and Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable were both at the 3rd tier, while the large black dog was still at the 2nd tier. This seemed to be his limit. Ling Shi and Fu Tianqing suddenly opened their eyes. This was because Ling Han had accidentally leaked out some of his aura from his excitement. "What is it?" Ling Jianxue asked. His cultivation level was lower, so he didn't sense anything. "Someone is spying on us," Ling Shi said, using her divine sense. Ling Jianxue raised his eyebrow and humphed. They were already prisoners. Who would spy on them? "Stop hiding and show yourself!" Ling Fifan barked. Ling Han sighed. He had intended to come and go quietly, but now that Ling Fifan yelled so loudly, the old monster guarding this place surely had to have been alarmed. He walked out and smiled. "Would it kill you to be a little quiet?" Ling Fifan was shocked, but his expression soon turned to joy. "Old man, it's you! Why? Am I not welcome?" Ling Han glared and added, "Then I guess I should just leave." "Father!" Ling Jianxue and Ling Shi shouted at the same time. They were both elated. "Fourth brother! Little Han!" They all knew that now that Ling Han was here, he clearly intended to rescue them, and he undoubtedly had a pretty high chance of doing so. "Greetings, Master," Fu Tianqing said as he hastily knelt. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "We can reminisce later. Let's leave this place now." Since you're already here, why leave?" a cold voice remarked. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains appeared. Chapter 2979 Fighting Against Shatter Mountains. Chapter 2979 Fighting Against Shatter Mountains. 2979 Fighting Against Shatter Mountains. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains appeared, staring coldly at Ling Han. There was a foreboding chill in his gaze. For someone at the 7th tier, there was virtually nothing they couldn't accomplish. However, Ling Han had managed to escape from his grasp time and again, and even destroyed one of his doppelgangers. This was a great disgrace for him. Moreover, there was a chance Ling Han could threaten Feng Wuding's position as the Son of Destiny. This was all more a reason for him to want to eliminate Ling Han. After plotting for all these years, this rascal had finally fallen into his trap. Ling Han smiled. "Stinky old fart, long time no see. You're as annoying as always." Wasn't that the case? They were having a long-awaited reunion between friends and family, but Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains just had to stick his nose in. Humph, I will kill all these people in front of you one at a time. Let's see how you'll laugh then, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains coldly declared. Even though he was talking about the lives of Heavenly Venerates, his expression was unperturbed, as though they were no more than mere pests. Ling Han's expression turned cold as he said, "Old bastard, are you that eager to die?" Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains scoffed, and didn't reply to Ling Han. As a 7th tier, why should he even bother arguing? He quickly struck out, but not towards Ling Han. Instead, he reached for Ling Shi. He had already declared that he would kill them all one at a time in front of Ling Han, and a 7th tier was not one to joke around. "Scram!" Ling Han shouted. He punched out towards Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains. Boom! After an intense shockwave, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' blow was stopped by Ling Han. However, he didn't completely disperse the force, but rather he just deflected it off course. There was no helping it. Ling Han's battle prowess had only entered the 7th tier, and he was much like Shou Hung and Chu Hao back when they had just broken through, and they were not able to compete against a veteran like Shatter Mountains head-on in terms of power. Aside from that, Ling Han had a bigger handicap still, as his physique had not reached an indestructible state yet. "Go on ahead!" Ling Han yelled. His power was weaker than that of Shatter Mountains, and he didn't have an indestructible body to fall back on. The situation would only worsen if the battle dragged on. Moreover, the objective of this mission was to rescue the hostages. Now that he had succeeded, why should they dally around? Ling Han would definitely kill Shatter Mountains, but it would definitely not be now. Ling Shi and the rest nodded as they knew that they wouldn't be much help if they stayed. It would only be a hindrance to Ling Han, so they quickly went on their way. "Little Han, beat the shit out of that old fogey!" The large black dog did not forget about verbally assaulting Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains before he left. As expected, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains' expression darkened immediately after hearing this. That black dog had always acted very obediently. Shatter Mountains never imagined the former would have such a dirty mouth once he was released. If he had known, he would have slapped him to death a long time ago. "No one is getting away!" Shatter Mountains coldly declared, emanating the strength of a 7th tier. He planned to go on a killing spree. Shatter Mountains completely ignored Ling Han. He was a true 7th tier, and had an indestructible body. So what if Ling Han were to get a few punches in? Not even an existence as terrifying as Hysteria would be able to kill Shatter Mountains, much less Ling Han and his newfound 7th tier battle prowess. He would rather take Ling Han's punch than let any of the hostages go. Otherwise, he would fail to make true on his declaration. Pun! Under Ling Han's fist of fury, Shatter Mountains couldn't help caving and flew back from the force. Boom! Naturally, his attack was also heavily sent off course and cancelled out. Using this opportunity, Ling Shi and the rest ran far away. A Heavenly Venerate's speed was incredible, and they could traverse a great distance with a single step. Shatter Mountains had missed his chance, and was beside himself with rage. Even when he had just become a Heavenly Venerate, his word had been the law, and everyone had had to follow suit. This was even more so now that he was a 7th tier. However, it seemed like the prestige of a 7th tier was completely worthless in front of Ling Han. He wanted to kill Ling Han, but couldn't. And when he wanted to kill the people beside Ling Han, he also failed. Why was it so difficult? Humph, you've made something of yourself. I regret not taking your life when I had the chance, Shatter Mountains said coldly. Truthfully, he had had plenty of opportunities to get rid of Ling Han, but he hadn't thought much of him at the time. By the time he figured he should erase him, he was stopped by Lin Luo. And when he really wanted Ling Han dead, the boy was gone without a trace. Now Ling Han was back, and he had a 7th tier's battle prowess. It would be extremely difficult to try and kill him now. Ling Han laughed. I'm sure your daddy regrets giving birth to an animal like you too. Fuck. Even though Shatter Mountains possessed a will unshakable by anyone else, his expression still couldn't help twitching. Ling Han's words were extremely damaging to his ego. This kid had a very poisonous tongue. There were no other heavenly venerates who insulted someone like he did. Even though Ling Han didn't care for a heavenly venerate's prestige, Shatter Mountains had a reputation to uphold, and couldn't reduce himself to hurling insults with Ling Han. What would become of him then? Good! Very good! Shatter Mountains said menacingly as flames shot out from his eyes. These were karmic flames birthed from the intense friction between 6 types of fundamental powers. Even a 6th tier would suffer severe injuries by a mere touch. Shatter Mountains no longer cared for arguments, and simply let his actions do the talking. When it came to insults, the only person who could keep up with Ling Han was the large black dog. Boom! The rage of a 7th tier struck out with terrifying force. Ling Han didn't dare to take it lightly. He immediately channeled all of his 7th grade seals, and struck back at Shatter Mountains. There was no room for error. After all, he didn't have an indestructible body. When both their attacks crashed into each other, it generated a massive explosion. The shock waves alone caused the entire 100 Frost Valley to tremble and quake. This area was reinforced by Shatter Mountain's mystical power. Even if a 6th tier were to fight at full strength, it would displace a few rocks at most. There was no way they would be able to do any severe damage. However, against the 7th tier's power, this protection was practically non-existent. Even a single strike would be able to cause widespread destruction. Shatter Mountains fell back over 50 kilometers with this single blow. However, his whole body was soon enveloped in a bright light as the 6 different fundamental powers coalesced to become 6 pairs of wings. He flapped all of his wings, creating a powerful counterforce that allowed him to regain his balance and stopped his momentum. Die! With a powerful beat of his wings, his body immediately rushed forward at an unimaginable speed. This was a 7th tier. When Ling Han channeled his 7th grade combination seals, his strength had already surpassed that of Shatter Mountains. After all, the difference between a peak 7th tier and an early stage 7th tier was nowhere near as terrifying as 2,000 folds. However, Ling Han's physique was too weak, and the massive rebound created from the clash caused his entire body to tremble and his expression to turn pale. Ling Han couldn't deny that there wasn't much of an advantage to be had just by having the upper hand in terms of power, while his cultivation had yet to reach the 7th tier. He was a prime example of this. Even though his power was higher, he was still the one who was trembling from the shock wave, and not Shatter Mountains. Ling Han grew even more alarmed at the fact that Shatter Mountains hadn't channeled a single heavenly venerable seal. Would a dignified 7th tier not have a single heavenly venerable seal? That was not possible. A 7th tier would definitely have a 1st grade seal. The question was how many they had, and whether they could form a set of combination seals. However, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains didn't use a single heavenly venerable seal. Why? The old man was definitely intending to kill Ling Han, and not give him the chance to escape into the void. Chapter 2980 Successful Retreat. Chapter 2980 Successful Retreat. 2980 Successful Retreat. Without any hesitation, Ling Han turned around and left. At present, he was only barely qualified to stand against the 7th tier, but if he naively considered himself as being capable of defeating a 7th tier, that would really be courting death. When he advanced to the 6th tier, so what if his opponent was a 7th tier? He would suppress him. Stinky old bastard, we'll meet again as long as time stands. Goodbye. Ling Han tore a rip into the void, and directly fled. Still trying to escape? Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains smirked coldly. Boom, he finally exploded with his full power, and 36 seals on his body lit up at the same time. 1st grade seals. Shatter Mountains had actually mastered 36 1st grade seals, and they were combination seals at that. This caused his power to spike by close to 2,000 times all of a sudden. This was not inferior to Ling Han's boost, and his basic power was much higher than Ling Han's in the first place, so it was naturally even more terrifying. The wings of light formed by the 6 fundamental powers flapped rapidly, causing Shatter Mountains' speed to soar to the extreme, allowing him to rapidly close the distance between them. Seeing Shatter Mountains reveal his trump card, Ling Han breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that Shatter Mountains would channel all the first-grade seals in one go. That kind of explosive power might be able to reach 4,000 or 5,000 times. Then, it would really be able to insta-kill Ling Han. Thankfully, it was equivalent to both their power amplification having been removed. Ling Han was no match for his enemy, but he could still resist for a while. The wishful thinking of Shatter Mountains was naturally his hoping to exhaust the energy release of Ling Han's 7th-grade combination seals. Only then would he suddenly explode, and the chance of killing Ling Han would naturally be even higher. Now that it looked like Ling Han was about to flee, he had no choice but to change his mind and reveal his trump card in advance. However, with the 6 wings of light moving at the same time, the speed was really too great, so great that just when Ling Han entered into the void, before the rip had even closed, Shatter Mountains had already charged over. Boom! He delivered a palm strike, and the 6 fundamental powers manifested, forming 6 divine weapons that struck out at Ling Han, each boosted with terrifying power. Ling Han's eyes involuntarily focused. He didn't know this move himself. In terms of the use of fundamental power, Shatter Mountains surpassed him far too much. It could not be helped. After all, he was a 7th tier that had come from the Genesis world of the last era. Merely in this aspect, perhaps even Lin Luo, Xian Fu, and the others would not be a match for a veteran 7th tier. Ling Han threw out the fists of fury in response. Boom! Power surged, and a howl resounded within the void. Ling Han was sent flying backwards, and he felt like his body was about to be split into pieces. Though both of them had increased their power by more than 2,000 times, which seemed fair, the power created by the impact had also increased greatly. For Ling Han's physique, this was a massive test. Pooh! He vomited a mouthful of blood, and felt that his vision was a little blurry. Even if Shatter Mountains had the advantage in terms of power, he was still stunned for a moment. When he caught up again, Ling Han had already torn a rip into the void and left. He was much stronger than Ling Han, but he was like a blind man in the void. He could only fumble his way back, but could not open a new path. Wasn't Hysteria even stronger than him? If it had had the same ability as Ling Han, it would have long since extended its tentacles into various dimensions, engulfing even Genesis world. Ping! Ling Han fell out, and his head hit the ground as he panted heavily. Even though it was merely just a single exchange, just a single strike, it had already caused Ling Han to suffer serious injury. After his power had reached its limit, there would also be a huge requirement on the physique. For example, Ling Han had only lost because of his physique. It was clear that there was not much of a gap between them in power. The improvement of the physique can only depend on the tempering of fundamental power, but I have only grasped 4 types now. Compared to the 7th tier, there is still a gap. I am at too much of a disadvantage. Ling Han forcefully sat in a cross-legged position, mumbling to himself as he consumed healing-type great herbs. At first, he had thought that now that he had advanced to the 5th tier, his strength had increased, and he had gained the qualifications to match a 7th tier heavenly venerate. In truth, all he could do was withstand a few blows. In fact, when a 7th tier heavenly venerate unleashed their full might, he could only take 1 blow. I can either advance to the 6th tier, or think of some way to make my physique become stronger. It's too difficult to advance to the 6th tier, and according to my situation, the Crimson Great Herbs should be ineffective for me. So, all I can do now is think of some way to make my physique stronger. Though the unique power of dimension can't compare to the fundamental power, with so many powers of dimension in my body combined together, it should not be inferior to fundamental power. Alright, I'll reunite with Jian Xue and the others first, then head to the Genesis world of the last era. I want to obtain even more great herbs so that the dimensions in my body can grow rapidly. Ling Han gnawed on the great herbs, and quickly suppressed his injuries. However, the attack of a 7th tier was too terrifying, and he would not be able to recover for a short while. It couldn't be helped. Heavenly Venerable tier elites were hated by the heavens. Once they were wounded, the heaven and earth would naturally seize this opportunity to target them. Fortunately, the Genesis world of the last era still produced healing great herbs. Otherwise, Ling Han could only endure it bit by bit. It wasn't impossible for heavenly venerates to die if they couldn't endure it. After recovering slightly, Ling Han rushed to meet up with the Empress and the others. Previously, when he had told Ling Shi and the others to leave, he had also informed them of the whereabouts of the Empress and Hu Niu. They all knew where to meet up. Not long after, Ling Han returned to peaceful Leaf City. Ling Han! Father! Fourth brother! Everyone gathered around him. After a separation of tens of billions of years, everyone had undergone a great change. The most exaggerated was Ling Han, who could even save people from the hands of a seventh tier now. Ling Han nodded with a smile and said, "It's all because of me. I've implicated everyone. Haha, to be able to be the guest of a seventh tier, having enough food and drink, how many people would be able to enjoy such a good thing?" Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable said with a smile. This made everyone laugh. Thinking about it, it was true. How many people could make a seventh tier apprehensive and capture them without killing them? Meanwhile, the large black dog howled. "Little Han, since you now possess the power of a seventh tier, shouldn't we establish our own sect?" Ling Han shook his head. "I can just barely match a seventh tier, and am still far from being a qualified opponent." Everyone couldn't help but fall silent. In other words, under the abuse of power of a seventh tier, they could only live in seclusion. Ling Han smiled and said, "I plan to go to the Genesis world of the last era again to improve my strength. At that time, I'll be able to truly stand against a seventh tier." When they heard these words, everyone nodded. Throughout his whole journey, Ling Han had already fully proven his freakish talent. Since he was so confident, he would definitely be able to do it. Everyone decided to endure silently for the moment. When Ling Han truly possessed the ability to match a seventh tier, it would be the day that they would be able to hold their heads high. Ling Han didn't bring anyone with him, and he set out alone. It would be too dangerous to travel to dimensions below the 10th level of the Genesis world of the last era. Even with the protection of a spatial celestial tool that was forged from devouring metal, it would be useless. It would only be sending them to their deaths. Thus, Ling Han could only act alone. However, before setting out, Ling Han first went to Zhou Heng's place. He was very curious about one thing, and that was the identity of Jue Huo. Shatter Mountains and the others actually called her Extermination. What was going on here? Chapter 2981 The Identity of Jue Huo. Chapter 2981 The Identity of Jue Huo. 2981 The Identity of Jue Huo. Ling Han naturally couldn't ask Shatter Mountains, Chong Yen, and the others, though these 5 seventh tiers knew even better about this matter. Thus, he settled for the next best thing. He arrived at the Zhou clan. Ling Han released his aura slightly, and an incredibly deep aura immediately surged out. Zhou Heng walked out. Close to 2 billion years had passed, and Zhou Heng's strength had improved greatly again. He had just advanced to the 7th tier, so there was still room for improvement. "You're injured?" Zhou Heng frowned. Ling Han nodded, and related how he had fought with Shatter Mountains. Zhou Heng couldn't help but laugh loudly, saying, "As expected. After advancing to the 5th tier, you possess battle prowess that can rival 7th tier elites. However, your physique is a shortcoming. You need to be careful, and you can't be blindly confident." Ling Han nodded. "I will keep that in mind. Next, you should be going to the Genesis world of the last era, right?" Zhou Heng asked. Seeing Ling Han's surprised expression, Zhou Heng smiled, and continued. "However, you may be disappointed. Those dimensions have actually been explored by the 7th tiers, but they stopped at the 33rd dimension. From there onwards, the fundamental particles have been compressed too much, forming a barrier that even a 7th tier can't break through. 7th tiers were immortal and indestructible, but it did not mean that power could overwhelm everything. They could still be blocked or even suppressed." "Would a 7th tier still be interested in those great herbs?" Ling Han asked in confusion. Zhou Heng shook his head and said, 7 tiers might not need them. However, how could it be that 7 tiers have no descendants? Even for Chongyan, Shatter Mountains, and the others, wouldn't they still have to nurture Feng Wuding? So that was how it was. Everyone was selfish, and even 7th tiers were no exception. However, when it came to Feng Wuding, Ling Han smiled and said, "Then has Feng Wuding advanced to the 5th tier?" Zhou Heng nodded happily. "Not only him, but Yulian Haoyang and Qihu have also all advanced to the 6th tier, possessing 7th tier battle prowess. That brat, Myfin, is slightly inferior, but we are all nurturing him with our full efforts. Probably he would also be able to advance into 6th tier within 10 billion years, and similarly possess 7th tier battle prowess." For the Genesis world, this was really a great piece of good news. All of a sudden, so many people with 7th tier battle prowess had appeared. Merely possessing 7th tier battle prowess was useless. Without an undying and indestructible physique, they would only be a piece of cake in front of hysteria, and would be killed in a few moves. Hence, whether it was Ling Han, Feng Wuding, Lin Youlian, Wu Haoyang, or the like, there was still a long way to go. "What is most important is still you and Feng Wuding," Zhou Heng said solemnly. "One is the son of destiny of the Genesis world from the last era, and the other is the chosen one of the present generation. If the two of you advance to the 7th tier, you may be able to completely dispose of hysteria." Ling Han sighed. Zhou Heng and the others hoped that he and Feng Wuding could mature together, join forces against hysteria, and be broad-minded. However, Chongyan, Shatter Mountains, and the others wanted to kill Ling Han, making Feng Wuding take the lead. In comparison, it was clear who was superior. A solemn expression immediately appeared on Zhou Heng's face, and he said, "You might not believe me even if I told you. Let's give it a try," Ling Han said with a smile. "Jue Huo is hysteria from the last era, the true body of extermination," Zhou Heng said word by word. "What?" Even if Ling Han had excellent control, when he heard these words, he still exclaimed internally, revealing an expression of disbelief. Shouldn't it have been annihilated in the great destruction of the Genesis world from the last era? If Extermination's physical body hadn't been damaged at that time, why would it have become hysteria? It could have immediately swept up the winds and clouds again, and Genesis world would have fallen into its hands long ago. And if Extermination's physical body was destroyed, how could the current Jue Huo be its true body? Zhou Heng shook his head, and said, "Chong Yen and the others all insisted that Jue Huo was Extermination, possessing the same appearance and aura. Most importantly, how could a person with 7th tier power possibly appear out of thin air? Jue Huo was Extermination. This could explain a great many things. For example, she also possessed the ability to devour life essence. She wasn't Hysteria's subordinate at all, but Hysteria's true body, the true body from the last era." Afterwards, everyone made some deductions, and thought that the destructive attack of the Genesis world at that time had indeed severely wounded Extermination, causing its body to be separated from its spirit. Furthermore, only a sliver of its spirit was left behind, and it was not enough to create waves at all, Zhou Heng said, relating the deductions of the 7th tiers. Afterwards, a new Genesis world was formed, but Extermination's spirit was still hibernating because it was too heavily wounded. Until, by chance, a certain dimension actually created a monster, which finally gave Extermination a chance. Her spirit took control, and slowly grew stronger. Finally, this monster became Hysteria, which manifested into a dimension, starting the realm war. Perhaps it may even be the influence of Extermination's spirit that gave the people of that dimension the idea of creating hysteria. On the other hand, after countless years of slumber, the true body of the Extermination formed a new soul. Because it was created by this physical body, it inevitably possesses the ability of extermination, and is connected with the present hysteria. Ling Han was surprised. Then doesn't that mean that we may have to face two hysterias? One was hysteria, and the other was hysteria's predecessor, extermination. This trouble. Zhou Heng pondered for a moment before shaking his head, and saying, "We still don't know what extermination wants to do." Back then, she left after failing to obtain the dimensional core. She didn't appear again. Ling Han was curious. Could it be that this extermination has no interest in manifesting as a dimension anymore? Hold on, what was the realm war of the Genesis world of the last era like? During the realm war of the Genesis world of the last era, extermination clearly hadn't manifested as a dimension. Otherwise, how could she have possessed a physical body? However, this wasn't definite. Hysteria had manifested as a dimension, but didn't it still have its original form? The waving of its tentacles was simply captivating. The more Ling Han thought about it, the more he felt a headache coming on. He might as well not think about it. Anyways, there was one thing that he was certain of, and that was that Jue Huo was extermination. There was no doubt about that. Then does Senior also want to go to the Genesis world of the last era? Ling Han asked. Zhou Heng nodded and said, I'm also far from reaching the peak stage of the 7th tier. Some great herbs are still beneficial to my cultivation. On the other hand, Hysteria will soon digest the Flaming Frost realm, and the full-scale realm war will begin soon. This time, it's devoured another transcendent dimension. Even with the addition of junior brother Chu and I, the situation is still extremely dire. Ling Han nodded. On the side of the profound negative realm, there seem to be 2 more 7th-tier heavenly venerates, Zhou Heng and Chu Hao. However, Hysteria's improvement was even greater. Then let me have the honor of escorting Senior to the Genesis world of the last era, Ling Han said. Zhou Heng nodded happily. He knew that Ling Han possessed the ability to traverse between dimensions. However, before setting out, he called Chu Hao over, and Ling Han tore open a rip into the void, leaping all the way to the dimension closest to the Genesis world of the last era. Only then did he enter the void, heading straight for his target. Chapter 2982 Clash of 7 Tiers. Chapter 2982 Clash of 7 Tiers. 2982 Clash of 7 Tiers. After arriving at their destination, Ling Han and the others went their separate ways. They were all people with 7th-tier battle prowess. Which of them wasn't proud and arrogant? How could they be willing to bask in the glory of others? Ling Han headed downwards. Pun pun pun! He charged all the way to the 9th level in a single breath. Before this had been his limit, but now he had easily reached the 10th level. However, this place had long since been mined dry by those 6 tiers all those years ago, leaving behind only a stretch of barren land. Ling Han continued onwards. The fundamental particles were burning furiously, turning into terrifying flames. Thankfully, this was not deliberately done by a 7th-tier ultimate elite. The various particles were independent of each other, and while the flame's might was great, it was only much stronger than 6th tier. It had not reached the level of the 7th tier, but was rather in between the 2 cultivation levels. Thus, Ling Han only expended a little effort, and squeezed his way into the dimension of the 11th level. This place. He had never been here before, but just as Zhou Heng had said, he was really disappointed. It had been mined before, and endless energy storms gushed out of the mine shafts, turning this place into hell. Ling Han shook his head, and said, And they call themselves 7th tier, really, they don't have the slightest bit of taste. This place had really been completely dug up. He sensed for a while, and found that it was all abandoned scraps of stone, and there was not a single thing that could be used. Not only that, but this place had also suffered great damage, leaving behind multiple crevasses. It was not at all like the upper levels, where it was the mining that had created pits to dig out the heavenly venerable stones inside. True, how could a 7th tier have so much time? This should also be because it was only after the Flaming Frost realm had fallen that the ultimate elites had found the time to enter here to mine. Otherwise, even if they had sent out a doppelganger, it would have been useless. They would not have been able to arrive here at all. Let's go to the next level. Ling Han broke through the ground, and headed towards the dimension of the 12th level. The fundamental particles here were compressed, and the friction became even stronger. Even Ling Han had to strengthen his defenses a bit to be able to pass through. However, What disappointed him was the fact that this place was also completely empty from the excavation. Just think, since the flaming frost realm had fallen, how many hundreds of millions of years had it been? Just how powerful were 7 tiers? Was it not easy to hollow out a dimension? Moreover, the further down they went, the smaller the dimension, so their speed was naturally faster with each level down. Ling Han was not discouraged, and continued downwards. The pressure was increasing, and the flames formed by the fundamental particles were also becoming more and more frightening, causing even Ling Han to become worried. If he went a few levels further, would he be able to withstand it? After all, he was not a real 7th tier, and his physique was not invincible. Fine, let's go to the 14th level. And just like that, right as Ling Han arrived at the 23rd level, he finally discovered that this was a world that had not been fully excavated. Let's get to work. Ling Han released his divine sense to search for treasures. His strength had improved further, and was practically the top in the world. Needless to say, the strength of his divine sense had also increased. The speed of his search was extremely fast. Half a day later, he stretched out his hand and grabbed, and the power took the form of a giant hand. Pung, 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 it blasted through the ground, and then grabbed a great herb. Green. Without another word, Ling Han directly swallowed it. For his present strength, the increase in cultivation level brought by a green great herb was no longer obvious. But no matter how small a mosquito's leg was, it was still meat. After another half a day, Ling Han stretched out his hand again. Pun, bits of rock flew in all directions. This time, he obtained a heavenly venerable seal. A 6th grade seal, one that he did not possess yet. Ling Han nodded. When his cultivation level reached the peak stage of the 5th tier, he would go into seclusion for a long time, and deduce all the 6th grade seals. 7th tier heavenly venerates all had several dozen 1st grade seals, and they could form combination seals at that, which filled him with a strong sense of danger and vigilance. However, with the restrictions of the cultivation level, it was too difficult for him to deduce 1st grade seals now. It was more reliable to start from the 6th grade seals. Furthermore, after he deduced all of them, their might would also be very strong. Time passed quietly. Ling Han had gained quite a lot, but they were basically all green great herbs and below in grade. They were of limited help to him, and in the case of heavenly venerable seals, there were only a total of 6, and he already possessed 2 of these 6. 3 years passed, and Ling Han was still exploring veins of ore and collecting treasures every day. He had long since left the area where he had entered previously, and who knew where he had gone. On this day, he discovered another great herb. Boom, a large hand stretched out. But when his large hand grabbed onto that great herb, a powerful force also assailed. Boom, this force hit his hand, and the shock wave almost caused his large hand to shatter. After all, it was condensed from power, so its toughness was limited. However, the great herb in his hand was shattered into pieces. The power of the 7th tier was too strong. Ling Han's expression faltered for a moment before becoming furious. Fuck, he had finally found a great herb with great difficulty. Who was it that had ruined his plans? Wang, a powerful aura also surged over. Clearly, the other party was also very angry, and thought that it was Ling Han who had snatched something from him. Ling Han's figure flew up, and streaked towards that person. Judging by the aura that the person exuded, this was not a 7th tier ultimate elite. Extermination Jue Huo. Ling Han soon spotted his opponent. It was his old rival who had repeatedly wanted to kill him. No wonder he had sensed that the person's aura didn't reach 7th tier, yet he could still come here. Extermination Jue Huo laughed loudly. Ling Han, we meet again. Ling Han wore a baleful expression as he asked, "How do you want to die?" Ling Han was filled with fury for Extermination Jue Huo. This guy was jealous of him, but Ling Han did not take it to heart. However, Extermination Jue Huo would always use his public office to avenge his personal grudges. This was going too far. If you can, then come out in the open. In a battle of equal cultivation level, let's see who is more impressive. You still can't kill me. Xian Chihu said with a smile. He crooked a finger at Ling Han. Since you want to fight, fine, I'll play with you. Play your sister! Ling Han charged out, and Fists of Fury was already used. Xian Chihu's expression was slightly ugly. He really had a sister, and Ling Han wanted to play around with his sister? Fuck! He was also enraged, brandishing his fists to greet Ling Han's oncoming charge. Both of them were supreme prodigies, and both of them possessed 7th-tier battle prowess. With a single strike, the ground around them shattered, appearing extremely fragile in front of their power. Boom! 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 After over 100 consecutive clashes, they were both bathed in blood. It could not be helped. Their power had surpassed their cultivation level, and their physique could not bear it. Xian Chihu was still fine. After all, Xian Chihu had an additional fundamental power to temper his body compared to Ling Han, so only his skin had cracked. Meanwhile, Ling Han's heart, lungs, and other internal organs had all cracked, and he was very severely wounded. Ling Han, the higher the cultivation level, the greater the gap, Xian Chihu said proudly. Even if you're no weaker than me in terms of power, what's the use? Your physique is far too inferior. His hands turned into axes, and slashed madly at Ling Han. This was the honest truth. The reason why 7th tiers were so awesome was naturally because their physique was indestructible. Otherwise, just look, there would definitely be people who would defect to join Hysteria's side. You're right. Ling Han nodded. If he wasn't willing to admit even this little bit of truth, then his concept of the big picture would really be too narrow-minded. Ling Han drew out the distance between them, and did not clash head-on with Xian Chihu. Instead, he used his power to form various weapons, and charged towards Xian Chihu, attacking, punching, ramming, or stabbing. This was the comprehension that he had gained after his battle with Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountains. Chapter 2983 Losers Need to Pay Up. Chapter 2983 2983 Losers Need to Pay Up. 2983 Losers Need to Pay Up. If Ling Han's physique was inferior, then he would choose not to battle against his opponents head-on. This was very simple logic. However, after increasing the distance between himself and Xian Chihu, his attacks using the weapons formed from his energy were naturally far weaker than before. Meanwhile, Xian Chihu displayed his might and courage as a supreme prodigy. He charged through Ling Han's attacks, and ferociously closed the distance between them. Pun pun pun! His palms were like battle axes as they slashed aside Ling Han's relentless attacks. Xian Chihu roared with laughter, and sneered. Ling Han, your power is equivalent to mine, yet your physique is so much weaker. That being the case, how are you going to rival me? At this moment, he had already arrived before Ling Han. Relying on this, Ling Han replied. Boom! Tens of thousands of dimensions materialized around him, illuminating the sky. Xian Chihu was instantly affected, with his body shuddering slightly. With tens of thousands of medium-level dimensions, most of them nearing the high level bearing down on him, even his 7th-tier battle prowess couldn't remain unaffected. Ling Han seized this opportunity to charge over and throw a ferocious punch at his face. Indeed, his act of retreating had only been a guise to appear weak. Xian Chihu hurriedly crossed his arms before his face to block this strike. Pun! Xian Chihu was instantly sent flying by this forceful punch. However, he quickly replied with a dozen punches of his own, forcefully stopping his retreat. You truly are a freak! Xian Chihu exclaimed. He could barely believe what he was seeing. He had battled against Feng Wuding before, and Feng Wuding had possessed 100 dimensions. Even though this had allowed Feng Wuding to suppress Xian Chihu, his advantage hadn't been all that obvious. Xian Chihu had still had the ability to rival the other party. After all, he had an advantage in terms of cultivation level. However, Ling Han possessed far too many dimensions, so many that Xian Chihu was too embarrassed to summon his 2 dimensions and end up humiliating himself. Come again! Ling Han roared with a soaring fighting spirit. The memory of Xian Chihu and Wu Haoyang rushing over to save him suddenly flashed past his mind. However, it was a shame that the three of them would most likely never fight side by side again. The two of them continued to battle, and Xianqihu started to feel a little apprehensive. However, he didn't dare to get too close to Ling Han either. Different from the close-quarter battle before, they were now engaged in a long-range battle. If they were facing different opponents, what would it matter that they were attacking from range? With Ling Han's and Xianqihu's 7th-tier battle prowess, even 6th-tier elites would be severely wounded if not instantly killed if they were to face these attacks. However, the issue was that both of them possessed 7th-tier battle prowess. This caused the battle between them to appear ferocious, yet neither of them was actually able to wound the other. This caused Ling Han to feel a slight sense of appreciation for his opponent's talent. However, his dominant feeling was still one of unbridled fury. This bloody bastard! Ling Han! Someone suddenly roared in a cold voice. Ling Han looked over, only to see Feng Wuding rushing over from the distance. His face was filled with rage. In their most recent battle, their cultivation levels had been the same, yet he hadn't been able to withstand a single strike from Ling Han. He couldn't bring himself to accept this. This was like a thorn in his heart, and it had almost prevented him from advancing to the 5th tier. He was going to seek revenge. Revenge? What are you shouting about? Piss off! Ling Han roared. He ignored Xianqihu and charged at Feng Wuding instead. Unexpectedly, Xianqihu didn't give chase. Instead, he stood there with his arms crossed, and it was as if he were going to simply spectate. Feng Wuding bellowed in fury before unleashing a punch. The 4 fundamental powers transformed into sabers, swords, axes, and polearms as they surged toward Ling Han. Huh! This is Shatter Mountain's technique. Ling Han was slightly astonished. This old bastard truly did take good care of Feng Wuding. He had even taught this secret technique to him. However, what did this matter? Feng Wuding wasn't the old bastard Shatter Mountains, after all. Ling Han was unafraid as he faced this attack head-on. He channeled all of his 7th-grade seals, increasing his power by almost 2,000-fold. This was utterly terrifying. If the Shatter Mountain's Heavenly Venerate didn't channel his Heavenly Venerable seals, even he would have to admit that he was no match for Ling Han. Pun! The 4 types of weapons immediately shattered, transforming into countless broken shards. Regardless of what Feng Wuding threw at Ling Han, all of his attacks would be obliterated before this absolute power. Shock and surprise washed across Feng Wuding's face. They were both at the 5th tier, and they both possessed a battle prowess at the 7th tier, so why was he still unable to rival Ling Han? He hurriedly summoned 100 dimensions. Wang Wan Wan! The high-level dimensions rose one by one, all of them shrouded in a peculiar light as they radiated a terrifying pressure. Even though Feng Wuding had summoned far fewer dimensions than Ling Han, this actually didn't matter too much, since neither of them had reached the peak cultivation level yet. Instead, Feng Wuding was under far less pressure because he only needed to concentrate on cultivating 100 dimensions. As such, he could potentially cultivate each of these dimensions to a higher level. Of course, the prerequisite was that his dimensions could withstand reaching a higher level. As he was the son of destiny of the Genesis world of the last era, it was clear that Feng Wuding possessed this ability. His dimensions had become or were infinitesimally close to becoming high-level dimensions. With all 100 of them unleashed at once, the might that they radiated was indeed quite terrifying. Ling Han humped before also summoning 100 dimensions. There was no need for too many, as he simply needed to negate the pressure being exuded by Feng Wuding's dimensions. Boom! 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 The two of them clashed, and Ling Han was no longer at a disadvantage in terms of his physique. Meanwhile, he was more so enjoying a huge advantage in terms of his power. This instantly caused Feng Wuding to question his life. Why was it like this? Why was he always suppressed by Ling Han? Was it going to remain this way forever? Feng Wuding lost his confidence for the first time. His battle prowess had already reached the 7th tier at this moment, yet he was still no match for Ling Han. What in the world did he need to do to overcome this great opponent? Losing his concentration for a moment, Feng Wuding was instantly struck by a powerful punch, which caused him to go flying back. He battled against Ling Han time and time again, and he was defeated by Ling Han time and time again. Feng Wuding forcefully stopped himself, his face filled with dejection and despondence. Was Ling Han his nemesis? However, as a supreme prodigy who was second to only Ling Han, Feng Wuding quickly rediscovered his confidence again. No, he could defeat Ling Han as long as he advanced to the 6th tier or the 7th tier before him. This was especially the case for the 7th tier. 7th tier elites were indestructible and undying, with their physiques also being invincible. Thus, if he advanced to the 7th tier first, he could simply exhaust Ling Han to death. There was a bright glimmer in his eyes, and he was instantly filled with a burning fighting spirit. Ling Han hesitated for a moment. Should he kill this person? After contemplating this for a brief moment, he decided to spare Feng Wuding. This was a defeated foe, after all, so did Ling Han need to worry about him overtaking him in the future? This was simply impossible, even if the person was Feng Wuding, a supreme prodigy who was second to only him. Piss off! And remember to keep your distance if you see me in the future. Otherwise, I'll pummel you every time I see you, Ling Han said. He had decided against killing Feng Wuding because hysteria was becoming increasingly powerful. Moreover, there was also the mysterious extermination, so the Genesis world was in desperate need of more 7th tier elites. Feng Wuding gritted his teeth and didn't retort Ling Han. Since his strength was inferior, anything that he said would only bring more humiliation to himself. Oh, that's right. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "The same rules as always. Give me all your treasures." He had almost forgotten that Feng Wuding was a wealth-delivering boy. How could he let him off the hook so easily? Feng Wuding's jaws dropped a little. You still want to rob me? Either you hand the treasures over yourself, or I'll cripple you and then search for the treasures myself. It's up to you, Ling Han said casually, giving his opponent two options. Feng Wuding gritted his teeth and waved a hand at Ling Han, instantly tossing a dozen or so great herbs over. Chapter 2984 Encounter. Chapter 2984, 2984 Encounter. 2984 Encounter. Ling Han caught the great herbs and nodded with a smile, saying, "Bye." Feng Wuding shook with fury. Which other 7th tier elite had to suffer such humiliation? Perhaps he was the only one. Even though he wasn't a genuine 7th tier elite, he did indeed possess battle prowess at the 7th tier. Thus, he could somewhat be considered a 7th tier elite. This was utter humiliation. This was utter embarrassment. Feng Wuding noted this down in his mind. He would transform this into boundless motivation, driving him to reach the 6th tier, or even the 7th tier more quickly. He would then defeat Ling Han and return all the humiliation that he had suffered. He would also... Stop daydreaming. Hurry up and piss off, Ling Han said with a wave of his hand, disrupting Feng Wuding's fanciful thoughts. Fuck. You're even trying to control my thoughts now? Feng Wuding gritted his teeth and turned around to leave. If he stayed, he would only suffer more humiliation at the hands of Ling Han. Ling Han turned around to face Extermination. You actually didn't interfere just then, he said with an expression of slight surprise. If Extermination had teamed up with Feng Wuding, the outcome of the battle would have been difficult to predict. Teaming up with him? Wouldn't that be lowering my own status? Extermination scoffed. Even though Ling Han detested this person, he still couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration upon hearing this. Feng Wuding was indeed more talented than Extermination. However, his sense of pride was greatly inferior. Then let us battle again, Ling Han said. The two of them hadn't determined a victor yet. As you wish, Extermination replied as he charged forward, taking the initiative and unleashing the first attack. The two of them became locked in an intense battle. However, just like before, this was a battle that was only intense on the surface. They were both attacking each other from range, with neither of them being able to genuinely threaten the other. After battling for 3 days, they both decided to stop at the same time. "I'll be sure to end your pathetic life the next time we meet," Ling Han promised. "I'll have you beheaded," Extermination replied, not backing down in the least. The two of them parted ways, each going in a different direction as they continued to search for veins of ore. They needed to obtain more resources to accelerate their growth. Ling Han was filled with motivation. He needed to crush Extermination, and he needed to overcome Shatter Mountains, Chongyan, and the others. These ambitions made him thirst for even more power. However, this dimension was truly too small, and it was also completely shattered and damaged. Thus, Ling Han quickly discovered that all of the veins of ore had already been cleaned out. He needed to venture a level deeper. Ling Han descended further down, and what he saw caused him to frown slightly. After reaching this level, the fundamental particles weren't just burning anymore. Instead, they were thick and concentrated, and they had all taken material form. The 6 types of fundamental particles formed the source powers of the Genesis world. They possessed unimaginable power. When these fundamental particles gathered together, one could imagine just how much of an obstruction they would become. Trying to push through them would be like an ordinary mortal trying to wade through a swamp. It would be incredibly difficult. Zhou Hun had said before that even genuine 7th-tier elites would be stopped at the 33rd level. This was because the fundamental particles in that level were so concentrated that they already formed an impenetrable wall. This was understandable when looking at the situation on this level. The slightly more concentrated fundamental particles were already enough to slow Ling Han down so much. It was easy to imagine that the fundamental particles could indeed stop even 7th-tier elites if they were 100 times or even 10,000 times more concentrated. Ling Han advanced at an incredibly slow rate. The fundamental particles carried with them boundless karmic flames as they whizzed around, causing them to be astonishingly destructive. This caused Ling Han to feel like he was battling against a 7th-tier elite the entire time. In fact, not with one 7th-tier elite, but with hundreds upon thousands of 7th-tier elites. It was as if they were bombarding him with attacks. Ling Han was under great strain. After all, his physique still had yet to reach the 7th tier, so he had to deal with every single attack. Otherwise, he would definitely be wounded. Once he became wounded in this harsh environment, he would descend into a vicious cycle where his wounds would only grow more and more severe. In the end, he would be killed. Great opportunities were always accompanied by grave dangers. This was a saying born from experience. Of course, this wasn't relevant for 7th-tier heavenly venerates. After reaching this paramount level, they no longer needed to worry about their own safety. They could go anywhere they wanted, not caring about whom or what they came across. They were transcendent above all matter. After struggling for 700 entire years, Ling Han finally managed to leave the mantle of this level and enter the next dimension. Boom! He was immediately attacked after he arrived, with an explosive gust of wind slamming into him. Fortunately, this gust of wind was only at the 6th tier, allowing him to easily deal with it. Ling Han glanced around, and a smile immediately appeared on his face. Even though there were also signs of excavation in this place, it hadn't been completely cleaned out yet. There was still value in exploring this dimension. Ling Han started to look around, not forgetting to chow down on the great herbs that Feng Wuding had offered to him at the same time. In just a few days, all of the great herbs were finished. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. The excessive number of dimensions in his body naturally allowed him to possess heaven-defying battle prowess. At the same time, however, this caused his cultivation speed to become shockingly low. After eating so many great herbs, his cultivation had only advanced by the tiniest bit. Search, and more searching. He continued to look around, and he did indeed make some gains. After all, there was only a limited number of 7th-tier elites in the world, and not all of them would have necessarily come to this place. For example, Chongyan and Shatter Mountains had come here to look for great herbs for Feng Wuding before. Now that Feng Wuding also possessed a battle prowess at the 7th tier, however, would they still do this for him? The answer was naturally no. After all, these people weren't nannies. Similarly, since Lin Youlian and Xian Qihu had advanced to the 6th tier and gained battle prowess of the 7th tier, Lin Luo and Xian Fu naturally wouldn't come here again, either. They couldn't possibly do everything for their children, could they? Ling Han's cultivation was increasing slowly. However, his cultivation speed was still several times faster than if he were simply cultivating in seclusion. Of course, Ling Han didn't abandon his normal cultivation either. He kept the heavenly venerable seals in his body illuminated the entire time, allowing them to absorb fundamental particles and strengthen the seemingly boundless power of dimension inside him. Right now, he possessed more than 400 heavenly venerable seals. Even though very few of them were high level, he was in possession of 3 complete combination seal sets, and this allowed his cultivation speed to increase by a whopping 3,500-fold. Even so, his progress was still abysmally slow. This was a reflection of just how boundless the power of dimension inside him was. This was a necessary price to pay if he wanted to become more powerful. After all, how could one possess an astonishing cultivation speed yet remain invincible at their cultivation level at the same time? After 30,000 years, this dimension was pretty much cleaned up by Ling Han. He was just about to set off for the next dimension, yet a powerful aura suddenly charged over with ferocity. 7th tier. Ling Han immediately came to his senses. Only when an elite perfected their fundamental powers and reached the 7th tier could their aura be so powerful and domineering. Who is it? Zhou Han? Or Chu Hao? Even though this aura was astoundingly powerful, Ling Han could also sense that it wasn't entirely stable. Thus, this was most likely a newly advanced 7th tier elite. Of course, newly advanced didn't mean that this person had only reached the 7th tier in the past 2 days. When it came to 7th tier elites, even those who had been at the 7th tier for 10 billion years could be considered as newly advanced. Whoosh! A person appeared before Ling Han, with his body shrouded in suns, moons, and stars. His aura was astonishingly domineering. Ling Han squinted his eyes. This person was surprisingly Golden Silk Moth. He actually advanced to the 7th tier? Ling Han already knew that among the 6th tier elites, Zhou Han, Chu Hao, 10,000 Shadows, and Golden Silk Moth had the best chance of advancing to the 7th tier. In the end, however, it was proven that Zhou Han and Chu Hao were slightly more freakish than the others. They had been able to advance to the 7th tier relying on their own abilities. By the looks of it, Golden Silk Moth had most likely obtained a shard of a dimension core, and it was thanks to this that he was able to advance to the 7th tier. Chapter 2985 Facing a 7th tier elite. Chapter 2985 Facing a 7th tier elite. 2985 Facing a 7th tier elite. Advancing from the 6th tier to the 7th tier was a completely different concept from the 7th tier battle prowess that Ling Han, Xian Qihu, and the others possessed. The reason for this was simple. Genuine 7th tier elites could wield 6 different types of fundamental particles, and this allowed their bodies to become indestructible. This would be their greatest advantage. After all, how could one fight against an indestructible and undying opponent? When Ling Han saw Golden Silk Moth also saw him. Killing intent instantly spread across his face. At that time, Golden Silk Moth, 10,000 Shadows, and Yu Borong had all advocated the disposal of Ling Han. In the end, however, Yu Borong was killed by Ling Han, while 10,000 Shadows had also been forced to flee in disarray when fighting over a shard of dimension core with him. The person who had fared the best was probably Golden Silk Moth. 7th tier elites were indestructible and undying, so they didn't need to fear anyone. "Brat, I didn't expect to see you here," Golden Silk Moth said in a baleful voice. "However, what a great opportunity this is for me to dispose of you, a traitor." Ling Han shrugged and said, "So what if you're a 7th tier elite? Is it really that amazing?" "Humph. If you don't reach the 7th tier, how would you know just how powerful a 7th tier elite is?" Golden Silk Moth sneered with an expression of contempt. "Don't think that you can rival a 7th tier elite just because you possess battle prowess at the 7th tier. This is nothing but a foolish fantasy. Standing at my lofty height, your existence is but like that of a mere ant. This omnipotent sensation. It's something that you won't be able to understand. Moreover, you won't ever have the chance to experience it either. As he said this, it was as if he were treating himself as a deity who sat atop an altar. Meanwhile, it was as if Ling Han were a peasant who could only kneel and kowtow to him. He was truly lost in a feeling of superiority. Ling Han shook his head and asked, "Any more last words?" "Last words? This brat treated my words as last words?" Gasp! What a toxic tongue! Golden Silk Moth's expression instantly became cold. As a paramount 7th tier elite who stood at the top of the world, he was someone who couldn't be blasphemed against. Others had to debase themselves and treat him with utmost respect and reverence. Yet, this brat actually dared to belittle him and ridicule him? Brat, you're about to die, yet you still insist on being so stubborn? Golden Silk Moth said in a calm voice. 7th tier elites naturally wouldn't lose control over their own emotions. I initially wanted to give you a quick and painless death, but you're begging for more suffering and pain. Ling Han sighed and said, I do indeed know the strength of 7th tier elites now. Your nonsense is so loud and obnoxious that it reverberates throughout the heavens. In this sense, I am indeed inferior to you. How admirable! He bowed as he said this. He was finally unable to contain his anger any longer, and he ferociously charged at Ling Han. His aura was devastating, and the 6 types of fundamental particles transformed into a spear in his hand that thrust at Ling Han. 7th tier elites were far too powerful, so much so that they were unable to use ordinary weapons. In fact, even heavenly venerate tools were unable to withstand the magnificent might of 7th tier elites. They would immediately shatter if they were used. However, this didn't matter. The 6 types of fundamental particles could gather together to form the most terrifying weapon in the world. Boom! The attack of the 7th tier elite was filled with might and dominance. Ling Han balled his hands into fists, and instantly activated all of his 7th grade seals at once, causing his power to increase 2,000-fold. 1. Tens of thousands of dimensions materialized in the air. He then threw a punch. Pun! Golden Silk Moth was sent flying back at a speed even quicker than his advance. He immediately became a small speck in the distance. However, 7th tier elites were indestructible and undying, with their physiques also being invincible. Even though Ling Han's punch was supremely powerful, it still failed to cause any damage to Golden Silk Moth. However, Golden Silk Moth's jaw still dropped open, with shock spreading across his face. As a mighty 7th tier heavenly venerate, he had actually been sent flying by a single punch? If news of this spread, would he still have the face to see anyone? Indeed, he had only just advanced to the 7th tier. However, this still wasn't reason enough. This was embarrassing. This was far too embarrassing. Golden Silk Moth hurriedly gathered his strength, and transformed the 6 types of fundamental particles into a gigantic palm. He slammed the palm into the ground in an attempt to halt his momentum, yet he was unable to stop himself no matter what. A deep pit was dug into the earth, and if water were to be poured inside, it would instantly transform into a large sea. Golden Silk Moth finally came to a rest after sliding tens of thousands of kilometers back. He couldn't help but feel astounded. Ling Han's strength was simply inconceivable. One had to realize that the higher one's cultivation level, the more difficult it would be for one to challenge those at higher cultivation levels. Moreover, 7th tier elites stood at the pinnacle of the world, so, theoretically speaking, they should have been invincible. Now, however, he was actually being suppressed by a 5th tier elite? If it weren't for his indestructible 7th tier physique, he would have most likely been crushed to death by this punch. With this in mind, Golden Silk Moth couldn't help but reach up and touch his face. After advancing to the 7th tier and being tempered by the 6 types of fundamental powers, one's physique would become indestructible. Not even the Genesis world exploding would be able to wound them. Thus, there wasn't a single mark left on his face. However, what astonished him was the fact that his mind shuddered a little. Weren't 7th tier elites indestructible and undying? If that was the case, then why did his mind shudder a little? Even though it was barely noticeable, what would happen if Ling Han were more powerful? Would he feel a piercing pain instead? In fact, after reaching a certain limit, would his mind directly explode from the shock? This wasn't impossible. After all, this was how Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand from the Genesis world of the last era had died. The problem was, could Ling Han become this powerful one day? So powerful that his attacks could rival the collapse of the Genesis world? Golden Silk Moth couldn't be certain. He could only hope that his physique and mind still had yet to reach their full strength because he had only just advanced to the 7th tier. He could only hope that experienced 7th tier elites wouldn't suffer the same outcome if they were to face Ling Han's strike. Whoosh! With a flash, Ling Han had already caught up to him. He immediately threw another punch. However, Ling Han held back this time, and he only channeled a single 6th grade seal. Brat, you dared to underestimate me? Golden Silk Moth roared. He felt like he was being brutally humiliated, and he immediately channeled a 2nd grade seal as he charged at Ling Han. They were both at the 7th tier, yet the gulf between Golden Silk Moth and Shatter Mountains was truly immense. Not only was Golden Silk Moth far weaker, but even the quality of his heavenly venerable seals was far inferior. However, this was inevitable. After all, Golden Silk Moth had been a 6th tier elite before, so the most powerful seals that he had been able to deduce were 2nd grade seals. How could he possibly compare to Shatter Mountains, a freak who had lived across 2 Genesis worlds? Pun! They exchanged another blow, and Golden Silk Moth was sent flying again. This time, however, Ling Han's punch was nowhere near as powerful as before, and this allowed Golden Silk Moth to quickly grind to a halt. However, his face was still filled with rage and shock. Ling Han had only channeled a single 6th grade seal, yet he had still been able to completely suppress him. Just how embarrassing was this? Golden Silk Moth had spoken with such arrogance and haughtiness just then, threatening Ling Han with an entire epoch of suffering and pain. Now, however, he was the one being pummeled. How could this gulf between expectation and reality not cause him to feel dejected and indignant? Ling Han didn't seize this opportunity to press his advantage. Instead, he proudly hovered above Golden Silk Moth and said calmly, 7th tier? Heh! He spoke only a few words, yet the disdain and contempt that these words carried cut bone deep. Golden Silk Moth's face twitched when he heard this. He felt like he was being humiliated again and again. He unleashed a deafening roar, and a boundless golden light erupted from his fists. Chapter 2986 Suppress. Chapter 2986, 2986 Suppress. 2986 Suppress. Golden Silk Moth gave everything he had, unleashing his most powerful ultimate technique. Not only were his hands glowing, but even his body started to radiate with a brilliant glow. He then transformed into an insect. Ling Han grimaced upon seeing this. He felt a strong urge to burst into laughter. Are you joking? This wasn't an ordinary insect, and it was instead a golden silkworm that measured 300 meters in length. Its body was covered in rings of golden light, and it was more so exuding a boundless chaotic aura that was filled with a sense of sacredness. This was the original form of Golden Silk Moth. He was originally a silkworm, and after 9 transformations, he finally advanced to the 7th tier. During his final transformation, he also returned to his original form, perfectly completing the cycle. However, this was a cycle that allowed his strength to rise explosively by countless times. Die! Golden Silk Moth roared. He opened his mouth, and the rings of golden light on his body undulated before shooting toward Ling Han. Wang Wang Wang! The rings of golden light arrived 30 meters above Ling Han, yet they didn't immediately slam down. Instead, they stopped for a brief moment before stacking together and forming a sheet of golden light. Ling Han instantly discovered that he couldn't move. This golden light is able to restrict movement. Ling Han glanced around, and he immediately gave an "oh" in realization. So that's how it is. As it turned out, Golden Silk Moth was purposely trying to appear mysterious. What was restricting Ling Han wasn't the sheet of golden light above his head. Instead, it was the barely perceptible golden threads that were so fine that they were almost invisible to the naked eye. Perhaps even 6th-tier elites wouldn't be able to see them. Is this his silk? However, after thinking about this for a moment, Ling Han realized that this was only natural. After advancing to the 7th tier and returning to his original form, of course this little silkworm would be able to spit silk. These lengths of silk were imbued with the 6 fundamental powers, and it was because of this that they were incredibly tough and able to restrict Ling Han. However, Golden Silk Moth was overestimating himself. Die, brat! Golden Silk Moth charged down, spitting out the 6 fundamental powers and forming a divine saber that slashed down at Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head as he channeled all of his 7th grade seals again. Snap, snap, snap! With a lift of his arms, all of the golden silk around him instantly snapped. He threw a punch at Golden Silk Moth. Spectacular expressions immediately flashed across Golden Silk Moth's face. In his eyes, this should have been his grand opportunity to counterattack and turn the tables. With Ling Han being restricted, he would have no option but to face his attacks head-on. Even if his strength were inferior to Ling Han's, his physique was definitely far superior to Ling Han's. He could remain unfazed after facing 10,000 or even 100 million strikes from Ling Han. However, Ling Han would suffer severe wounds or even be killed after facing a single one of his attacks. This was the freakish and unreasonable power of 7th-tier elites. Now, however, the situation was completely different from his imagination. This should have been his opportunity to land the killing blow, yet Ling Han had easily dealt with his ultimate technique, and then launched a counterattack of his own. In fact, it looked as if he were charging down to take Ling Han's punch on the face. Just how vexing was this? Pun! Just how quick were heavenly venerates? Before Golden Silk Moth could even finish his thoughts, the two of them had already clashed together. The divine saber that Golden Silk Moth had summoned was like a paper toy as it crumpled before Ling Han's fist. Meanwhile, Ling Han's fist continued to surge forward, eventually slamming into his face. The gigantic insect that measured 300 meters in length was instantly sent flying. Ling Han shrugged, shaking his head, and saying, "Still so weak." Golden Silk Moth was almost angered to death. Even though he wouldn't suffer any wounds regardless of how many times Ling Han attacked him, hearing such contemptuous and demeaning remarks from a 5th-tier heavenly venerate still caused him to feel an immense sense of humiliation and anger so severe that he almost wanted to end his own life. However, what could he say? His strength was indeed inferior. Far inferior. "I'll pummel you until you yield!" Ling Han roared. He continued to bombard Golden Silk Moth with furious attacks. Once Ling Han unleashed his might, Golden Silk Moth had no more opportunity to counterattack. His only option was to face these attacks head-on. Even though these attacks didn't hurt at all, this was still a tough mental challenge for Golden Silk Moth. He was filled with unbridled fury. In fact, he felt an urge to kill Ling Han even if this meant dropping back down to the 6th tier. "Brat, my physique is indestructible and invincible, so your attacks are nothing more than mere tickles," he roared. Even though he was being suppressed, he still tried to talk back and save some face for himself. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, "This is your grandpa spanking his grandson, understand? Grandson my A*S. Golden Silk Moth wanted to vomit blood. Just how many epochs had he cultivated for? The grandpa of Ling Han's grandpa's grandpa could easily be the grandson of his grandson's grandson. Yet, Ling Han actually wanted to flip this around and become his grandpa? The issue was that he was genuinely unable to fight back at this moment. Was this not like a grandpa spanking his grandson? Was he the most pitiful 7th-tier elite in the world? Ling Han's attacks became increasingly relentless and ferocious. However, he certainly didn't feel like he was wasting his strength, nor was he losing himself in the euphoria of pummeling a 7th-tier elite. No, this wasn't the case. Instead, he was doing this because 7th-tier elites could be suppressed even though they couldn't be killed. This was Ling Han's wild ambition at the moment. He was going to suppress a 7th tier elite. In the face of Ling Han's relentless attacks, Golden Silk Moth's body also started to change. From its initial 300 meters in length, it had now shrunk to just 270 meters. This was a very obvious transformation. This was the nature of being suppressed. Even though Ling Han's attacks couldn't wound Golden Silk Moth, they could indeed cause his physical form to change. It wasn't long before Golden Silk Moth shrunk to 240 meters in length, and then 210 meters, and then 180 meters. He shrunk more and more, and even when he eventually shrunk to 1 meter in length, Ling Han still didn't relent. Golden Silk Moth finally started to feel afraid. "Brat, what are you trying to do?" Ling Han grinned and replied, "Remember to call me Master in the future." "Master? What is he trying to say?" Golden Silk Moth faltered for a moment before suddenly coming to his senses. Ling Han wanted to become his master. "You've gone crazy." He was a 7th tier heavenly venerate. A 7th tier ultimate elite. Humph. 7th tier elites were indestructible and undying, and even paramount beings like Hysteria were unable to kill them. They were unafraid of anyone, so who could force a 7th tier elite to yield and become a subordinate? No one. The answer was no one. "In your dreams!" Golden Silk Moth spat coldly. Ling Han simply chuckled in reply. "Just you wait and see. 60 centimeters, 30 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 2 centimeters. Under Ling Han's barrage of attacks, Golden Silk Moth's body eventually shrunk to just 2 centimeters in length. This size was already no different from ordinary silkworms. It was just that his body was completely golden, making him appear especially sacred and pure. Ling Han grabbed Golden Silk Moth in his hand, with his devastating power like spiderwebs that wrapped around his body, preventing him from growing larger again. This didn't cause any harm to Golden Silk Moth's body. To say nothing of 2 centimeters, he wouldn't be injured even if he were to shrink 100 million times more. However, the problem was that he, a mighty 7th tier elite, was actually being pinched in someone's hand like a pet. Just how humiliating was this? If someone saw this, he would definitely lose all his face. "Ling Han, I'm a 7th tier elite, a main force in the battle against Hysteria. If you capture me, will that be fair to the world?" he shouted. However, his body was extremely small at the moment, and this caused his voice to sound extremely childish as well. It was as if he had truly become a child. "Pay. And I'm someone who can kill Hysteria. Yet how did you treat me?" Ling Han spat in disdain. "Obediently become my pet. When you decide to call me master, I'll consider letting you go." Chapter 2987 2987 Scared Away. Chapter 2987 2987 Scared Away. 2987 Scared Away. Golden Silk Moth was naturally appalled at the idea of referring to Ling Han as master. He silently swore to himself that if Ling Han ever fell into his hands, he would definitely torture Ling Han until the latter regretted the decisions that he made today. If he didn't kill Ling Han, then he wouldn't deserve to be an insect. Ling Han looked at him with a smile of ridicule. "Are you daydreaming about all the things that you do to me if you manage to escape and even become more powerful than me in the future?" "That's right," Golden Silk Moth replied without any sense of apprehension. Even though he was being suppressed, he possessed an invincible physique, which meant that he didn't need to worry about being wounded or killed. That being the case, what was there to be afraid of? Ling Han gave a sinister chuckle. "You think I can't deal with you? Where is the nearest toilet? Let me suppress this little insect there for 10,000 years first," he murmured to himself. Holy fuck! It was as if Golden Silk Moth had become stupid at this moment. "What? You actually want to suppress me in a toilet for 10,000 years? Even though he wouldn't suffer a single wound from this, just thinking about it gave him the chills. To say nothing of a 7th tier elite, even ordinary mortals wouldn't be able to withstand such humiliation. "You dare? You dare? You dare?" he roared again and again. Golden Silk Moth finally lost his cool. "Why wouldn't I dare? But there's no toilet here, so you can count yourself lucky. When we get back to the profound negative realm, though, I'll be sure to let you enjoy yourself. Ling Han snickered. Golden Silk Moth unleashed a barrage of profanity and curses at Ling Han. Apart from this, there was nothing else he could do. However, how many heavenly venerates were skilled at cursing people? Generally speaking, they would directly attack anyone who dared to offend or provoke them. Thus, Golden Silk Moth repeated the same old curses again and again. Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. This was far too tame and unimaginative. And you call yourself a 7th-tier elite? You don't even know how to curse people. How weak! Golden Silk Moth was instantly stifled upon hearing this. He didn't curse anymore, and he simply treated Ling Han as if he were empty air. Ling Han held Golden Silk Moth in his hand as he continued to search for veins of ore. From time to time, he would use a bit of power to restrict Golden Silk Moth. This was a 7th-tier elite, after all, someone who was indestructible and undying. As such, it was necessary for Ling Han to continually suppress Golden Silk Moth with power that far exceeded what the insect could wield now. Otherwise, Golden Silk Moth would be able to escape with ease and perhaps even launch a counterattack and severely wound him. If that were the case, then Ling Han would essentially be carrying a ticking time bomb with him. What would be the point of that? To Ling Han, this was indeed a very good opportunity to train himself. He would have to remain vigilant and battle-ready the entire time, and he was sure that this would put enough pressure on him to accelerate his cultivation speed even more. After looking around for a while, Ling Han quickly reaped some rewards again. He ate the great herbs as if he were eating vegetables. Heavenly venerable stones were able to cut off one's divine sense, and even 7th-tier heavenly venerates were no exception to this rule, so how was Ling Han managing to do this? He continued to battle with Ling Han. He was trying to break free, while Ling Han was trying to keep him suppressed. Even though Golden Silk Moth was imprisoned, it was actually he who was enjoying the advantage at this moment. This was because Ling Han had to continuously expend energy to keep him imprisoned. Meanwhile, he could break free if Ling Han lost concentration for just a single second. In this way, 300 years quickly passed. It's about time. Ling Han planned to enter the next dimension. He faltered for a brief moment. Another aura was rushing over, and this was an extremely powerful and domineering aura. It was another newly advanced 7th-tier elite. In the blink of an eye, this person appeared before Ling Han. Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows. Huh! He actually advanced to the 7th tier as well? A while ago, both 10,000 Shadows and Ling Han had set their sights on the same core fragment. In the end, Ling Han had obtained it, and 10,000 Shadows hadn't dared to battle him for it. Instead, he had directly fled. Ling Han had thought that after 10,000 Shadows lost this great opportunity, he wouldn't be able to obtain another core fragment. Who would have thought? He actually advanced to the 7th tier. Did he rely on his own strength? Or did he use some other means to obtain this core fragment? Golden Silk Moth! 10,000 Shadows exclaimed. He had initially been peering down at Ling Han in a haughty manner, but when he saw the golden silkworm in Ling Han's hand, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets in shock and disbelief. Fuck! Was he seeing things? As a mighty 7th tier ultimate elite, Golden Silk Moth was actually being held in Ling Han's hand like a pet? This? No matter who saw this, they would definitely feel like they were seeing things, right? Meanwhile, Golden Silk Moth was so embarrassed and humiliated that he wanted to die. It was all over. His glorious reputation was ruined forever. He had initially hoped to break free before they came across anyone else. That way, no one would know about this dark period of time as long as he didn't mention it. Now, however, his hopes vanished in a puff of smoke. One could imagine Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows' astonishment at this moment. When he first saw Ling Han just then, he had naturally peered down at him with a sense of superiority. 7th tier elites were the most powerful and invincible beings in the world, after all. Thus, he naturally didn't need to be afraid of Ling Han anymore. He would no longer need to flee with his tail between his legs. Now, however, he knew that he was wrong, very wrong. So what if 7th-tier elites couldn't be killed? They could still be suppressed just like anyone else. You've come at just the right time. Come on, go and keep your good friend company. Ling Han chuckled. He reached over with his right hand, grabbing at Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows. At this moment, Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows once again demonstrated the meaning of the word resolute. He turned around and unleashed 6 fundamental powers, transforming into a gust of wind as he whooshed into the distance, disappearing without a trace. In terms of traveling through the void, no one could rival Ling Han apart from Hysteria. In terms of traveling around a dimension, however, Ling Han was naturally no match for 7th-tier elites. Ling Han didn't give chase. In any case, it would be impossible for him to both suppress Golden Silk Moth and chase 10,000 Shadows at the same time. Even if he wanted to, he wouldn't have the ability to. If he tried, the result would inevitably be Golden Silk Moth breaking free and Ling Han having to flee from the joint attacks of Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows instead. 10,000 Shadows was scared away. However, this was only natural. He was still deeply traumatized by Ling Han, so how could he not lose his fighting spirit after seeing Golden Silk Moth, a fellow 7th-tier elite, being suppressed by Ling Han? As such, he had resolutely chosen to flee. He didn't want to become the second 7th-tier elite to be captured by Ling Han. Golden Silk Moth was also astounded. 10,000 Shadows fled just like that. Was he really a 7th-tier ultimate elite? However, he knew that he was the one to blame. Who told him to get captured? Who told him to create history for the 7th-tier elites? 10,000 Shadows was as strong as Golden Silk Moth. Since Golden Silk Moth had already been captured by Ling Han, this meant that 10,000 Shadows was also definitely no match for Ling Han. That stupid fool. Why didn't he think about it another way? Since there are 2 of us, and since both of us are undying, will we still be unable to defeat Ling Han? Very disappointed, aren't you? Ling Han asked with a smile. Golden Silk Moth didn't reply. This brat wouldn't be able to act so smugly for much longer. Once Chongyan and the others learned about this, they would definitely come to look for Ling Han. A subordinate of Hysteria imprisoning a 7th-tier elite? They definitely wouldn't tolerate this. It wouldn't be long before the 7th-tier elites started rushing over to save him. Even though this would stain his reputation forever, it was still better than being imprisoned by Ling Han. Ling Han smiled, and he naturally knew what Golden Silk Moth was thinking at this moment. However, he couldn't be bothered taunting him anymore. As he grew stronger, Golden Silk Moth would only feel increasing despair and helplessness. Ling Han entered the next dimension, but this was a dimension that he had already visited before. He had come here through the spatial passageway. He continued onward. Ling Han continued to visit veins of ore. At the same time, he also concealed his tracks as carefully as he could. He had already imprisoned a 7th-tier elite, so he would definitely be at a disadvantage if he were to battle another 7th-tier elite, regardless of their battle prowess. Chapter 2988 Shock. Chapter 2988, 2988 Shock. 2988 Shock. Over 1,000,000 years later, Ling Han had finally arrived at the dimension on the 33rd level. This was the last level a Heavenly Venerate would be able to reach. Beyond this point, the fundamental particles were extremely dense, reaching the point of forming a wall that not even a 7th tier would be able to pass. Throughout all these years, Golden Silk Moth and Ling Han were locked in battle. Naturally, the former would not submit to Ling Han and become his servant or follower. Even when he was a 6th tier, he wouldn't be subordinate to a 7th tier, much less now that he was a 7th tier himself. This was the pride of a Heavenly Venerate. However, Ling Han had also gathered many great herbs and increased his strength over the last few years. This made it progressively easier for him to suppress Golden Silk Moth. Originally, he would need to focus his attention on subduing Golden Silk Moth every few breaths or so, but now he could extend that time up to 30 minutes. As the time grew longer, Golden Silk Moth gradually lost hope as he watched while Ling Han grew stronger by the day. Would he have to live the remainder of his eternal life in such a fashion? Ling Han walked around this place, but it was clearly dug clean. There were no more veins of ore for him to mine. He gave up trying to search for more veins. Instead, he wanted to venture deeper in and see how tough that supposed wall, formed by fundamental particles, was to cross. Not to mention, with the fundamental particles solidified, would he be able to directly communicate with them and break through to the 6th or 7th tier? Whoosh! A figure quickly swooped in, revealing itself to be a beautiful woman. Lin Yolian. Miss Lin. Ling Han cupped his fists and greeted her. He had always had great respect and gratitude for the Lin clan. Even though Lin Yolian already possessed the 7th tier's battle prowess, she didn't have an air of arrogance at all. She curtsied towards Ling Han and greeted, "Brother Ling!" However, when her gaze fell upon the golden silkworm on Ling Han's hand, she couldn't help gasping in shock. So the rumors were true. Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth really has been suppressed by you. Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth heard her words clearly, and felt deeply embarrassed. This was like joking about a balding head right to a monk's face. Ling Han smiled. I plan to keep him as a pet. Lin Yulan was speechless. Ling Han was probably the only person who would do such a thing. Lin Luo could do it too, but given a 7th tier's indestructible body, Golden Silk Moth would eventually reach the peak of the 7th tier and match him in strength. How would Lin Luo suppress him then? Lin Luo wasn't afraid of that, but there were other people in the Lin clan to think of as well. Not all of them were at the 7th tier, and not all of them were as bold. Ling Han dared to do such a thing simply because the guy was quite a lunatic. Lin Yolian didn't speak much of it, since a deep resentment has already been born between them. Even if Ling Han was willing to let go of Golden Silk Moth now, would the latter just walk away and forget it ever happened? The atmosphere was a little awkward at this point, with either Ling Han or Lin Yolian saying anything as both of them couldn't come up with a topic to discuss. Whoosh! Another figure flew in. This time, it was Wu Haoyang. Ling Han nodded to him in greeting. Wu Haoyang returned the gesture, but when he noticed Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth, his expression also quickly turned to shock, and he couldn't look away. Golden Silk Moth was exasperated. Was he, a 7th tier, some kind of display? With all these people casting curious gazes at him, how would he be able to face the public in the future? Hee, Brother Ling is a bold one indeed! Wu Haoyang shook his head in admiration. It's nothing much, Ling Han humbly replied. However, Lin Yolian and Wu Haoyang almost wanted to curse out loud. If this wasn't anything much to him, then what was? Whoosh! Another person flew over. It was Extermination. He nodded towards Lin Yolian and Wu Haoyang. Then, as his gaze swept across Ling Han, he stopped upon seeing the Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth. Golden Silk Moth felt an urge to just kill himself, secretly praying that Extermination wouldn't comment on his plight. So the rumors were true. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out as Golden Silk Moth expected. Extermination addressed the matter, inadvertently adding insult to Golden Silk Moth's many emotional injuries. Not long after, Feng Wuding also showed himself. When he saw Ling Han, his first reaction was to turn around and leave. After all, Ling Han had already told him that he would beat him up every time he saw him. Feng Wuding had not achieved a major breakthrough in strength yet, so he naturally didn't want to antagonize Ling Han too much. Otherwise, he would just be putting himself through misery. However, when he noticed Golden Silk Moth, he blurted out, Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth, you really have fallen into Ling Han's hands. Golden Silk Moth. Feng Wuding quickly stopped himself, and then barked at Ling Han. I demand you release Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth immediately. Why should I do what you say? Who do you think you are? Ling Han shook his head and said, It looks like you haven't learned your lesson yet. How dare you shout in front of me? Feng Wuding was not acting rashly. He guessed that Ling Han would need to use a lot of his strength to suppress Golden Silk Moth. Hence, if Feng Wuding were to attack Ling Han now, the latter would no longer be able to suppress Golden Silk Moth. Should Golden Silk Moth be released, the two seventh tiers would be able to join forces and defeat Ling Han. Foam Wooding had always been the one to run when faced against Ling Han. Now, it was time to turn the tables on Ling Han. "Ling Han, you've gone too far!" Foam Wooding shouted as he immediately lunged forward. Ling Han scoffed and punched out. Pun! To save Golden Silk Moth, Foam Wooding decided to receive this attack head-on. However, under the tremendous pressure of Ling Han's power, he was launched backwards, rolling on the ground like a gourd. He was no match for Ling Han at all. He spat out blood. It was clear that the single strike had caused him tremendous injuries. There was no helping it. He was not formally a seventh tier yet, and his body was not at the point of being indestructible. Ling Han laughed. "I only need one hand to take care of you." To a heavenly venerate, it didn't really matter in terms of battle prowess whether they were fighting with one hand or two. However, Ling Han was implying that he would be able to suppress Golden Silk Moth with one hand while simultaneously defeating Foam Wooding with the other, and that he would be able to do so with ease. How insulting was that? Foam Wooding was furious, but he had no words to refute that. If he were a true seventh tier, he would be able to give Ling Han quite a bit of trouble. With an indestructible body, he could at least persist like an annoying bug. However, he was already suffering to the point of vomiting blood from a single strike as he was now. How would he be able to deal with Ling Han like this? Before Ling Han would even relax his grip on suppressing Heavenly Venerate Golden Silk Moth, Foam Wooding would already be pummeled to death. What should I do? He had already declared his stance. How would he be able to take it back now? "Ha ha, arrogant bastard! How dare you hold a seventh tier hostage!" A mocking voice resounded as Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows showed himself, emanating his powerful seventh tier aura. Foam Wooding was overjoyed. He knew that Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows didn't like Ling Han. His words now were also clearly meant to say that he was standing in opposition to Ling Han. With 10,000 Shadows' support, Foam Wooding was confident they would be able to defeat Ling Han. After all, Ling Han still had another seventh tier in his hands. Fighting 3 seventh tiers alone? Not even an experienced seventh tier like Lin Luo would be so bold as to say that he could do such a thing, let alone Ling Han with his newfound seventh tier strength that was only slightly more powerful than Foam Wooding's. "Brother 10,000 Shadows, let us join forces and take down this treacherous bastard," Foam Wooding said to Heavenly Venerate 10,000 Shadows. "Very well!" 10,000 Shadows nodded. Chapter 2989 Sudden Appearance of Extermination. Chapter 2989 Sudden Appearance of Extermination. 2989 Sudden Appearance of Extermination. The two great seventh tiers were about to join forces, and taking into account Golden Silk Moth that was suppressed by Ling Han, there were a total of 3 seventh tiers on their side. What was even more frightening was that there were 2 of them that were true seventh tier elites that were undying and indestructible. They couldn't be killed, couldn't be wounded, and could only be suppressed. How could this be resolved? How was Ling Han supposed to deal with this? Xian Qihu, Lin Youlian, and Wu Haoyang were also looking at Ling Han, wanting to see Ling Han's choice. The wisest course of action was naturally to turn around and leave. Ling Han's battle prowess was definitely stronger compared to any one of the 3 of his opponents, but Ling Han's physique was a shortcoming. With 1 against 3, a drawn-out battle would definitely result in his loss. Really, there was no need to resort to such brute force. However, without waiting for Ling Han to express his stand, or for Foam Wooding and 10,000 Shadows to move, a terrifying aura spread out, and another seventh tier elite appeared. Everyone turned to look in the direction of the aura. In the blink of an eye, a beautiful black figure had appeared. Instantly, everyone's expression froze, revealing an incredibly solemn mien. Extermination, it was actually Extermination. Unlike in the past, the current Extermination was cold and noble, her eyes extremely deep, exuding an incomparable intelligence. She was completely different from the previously memoryless, blank-faced, self-proclaimed Neo, Jue Huo. A man's name was like a tree's shadow. Who was Extermination? The culprit behind the destruction of the Genesis world of the last era. Now that such a vicious person had appeared, who would not feel uneasy? Everyone involuntarily stood in a row. The internal conflicts between them could be discussed later. Now, they had to fight together against this absolutely great enemy. Ling Han, let go of Brother Golden Silk Moth! 10,000 shadows shouted. Ling Han smiled calmly. If we fight, I will naturally let him go. He wasn't an ignorant person. If this Extermination had gone down the old path, he would have had to do his best to eliminate her. However, if this Extermination had changed her mind now, and no longer planned to devour the Genesis world, then what need was there for him to expend so much effort? In any case, seventh tiers were undying and indestructible. Even if he was thrown out in a chaotic battle, there was no need to worry about Golden Silk Moth sustaining any injury. Ling Han, you don't care about the big picture, you're completely a vile character. Foam Wooding also shouted loudly. Ling Han ignored him and simply stared at Extermination. This was the real opponent. Her beautiful eyes swept over them, and wherever her eyes passed, everyone would feel a chill, and they almost felt as if their skin was about to split apart. Ling Han, Xianqihu, and the others were still fine, but 10,000 shadows had cold sweat dripping down his forehead. He was a 7th tier, and his physique should be invincible. Why did he feel a tearing pain? Was this because Extermination was too strong, so strong that even the physique of a 7th tier elite could be shaken? No. This should be because his cultivation level was still too weak, and he had not reached the peak stage of the 7th tier, cultivating his physique to perfection. Otherwise, Lin Luo and the others would have long since died after battling with hysteria for so long. With this thought, 10,000 shadows finally felt slightly at ease. Otherwise, he would definitely have broken into a run and fled by now. Previously, when he had faced Ling Han, he had already run once, so what would it matter if he ran again? What do you want? Xianqihu asked. He was very bold. In front of Extermination, he actually dared to open his mouth and question her. His tone was also calm and composed, showing fully the demeanor of a supreme prodigy. On the other hand, there was an indescribable fear in Foam Wooding's eyes. For the people of the Genesis world, hysteria was the most terrifying, but for the people from the Genesis world of the last era, it was Extermination that was the most terrifying. Foam Wooding, for example, had listened to how Extermination had grown up to be so strong, so cruel, so terrifying. The image of her being like a heavenly demon had long since been ingrained into his bones, and now that he had seen her with his own eyes, it naturally made him involuntarily feel fear. This was the difference among prodigies. One's natural talent might be high, but it did not mean that one's willpower was as strong as iron. Extermination withdrew her gaze, and completely ignored Xianqihu. Instead, she delivered a palm strike at the ground. Boom! The ground instantly caved in, revealing a massive deep pit. It was dark like the mouth of a great beast, and was just about to swallow all life. She threw herself in. Her figure was exquisitely beautiful, causing one's imagination to run wild. However, those who knew her identity probably wouldn't dare to even think about it, right? Everyone looked at each other, none of them knowing what Extermination was playing at. Why had such a powerful 7th tier come here? Below the 33rd level, the fundamental particles formed a wall. Wasn't it that even 7th tiers couldn't pass through? Could it be that Extermination wanted to pass through? And what was her motive? Shio. Another 2 powerful auras surged past, and Zhou Heng and Chu Hao had arrived together. Was it Extermination? They grasped the aura of this place, and their expressions were extremely solemn. Xianqihu and the others all nodded. Even though they had 9 people with 7th tier battle prowess here, they were all newly advanced. If they really faced Extermination, aside from those 7th tier elites who could not die, the others would all be blasted into smithereens. And even if it was 7th tier elites, they would definitely be suppressed. Who knew, they might never see the light of day again. Extermination was actually this strong. Hence, the fact that Extermination didn't make a move just now was really baffling, and made people feel a lingering fear. Strange, why has Extermination come here? Zhou Heng murmured. Could it be that she has changed her purpose, and no longer wants to devour the Genesis world? Zhu Hao also said. Everyone looked at each other, none of them knowing what the meaning was behind Extermination's actions. Let's go back. Even peak stage 7th tiers won't be able to pass through the blockade below. It's meaningless to stay here, Zhu Hao said. Yes. Xian Qihu, Lin Youlian, and Wu Haoyang were all very respectful. Firstly, they were 6 tiers, and secondly, Zhu Hao and Zhou Heng were both extremely powerful characters. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, their strength was not much worse off, and deserved their respect. However, Feng Wuding didn't think much of Zhu Hao and Zhou Heng. Coming from the Genesis world of the last era, he had a natural feeling of superiority, and it was unknown where his confidence came from. Brother Chu, Brother Zhou, Golden Silk Moth is still in the hands of this brat. Please interfere and convince him to let him go. 10,000 Shadows suddenly spoke up. That's right. Now, with Hysteria in front of us and Extermination behind us, we need to work together. How can we allow our personal grudges to blind us? Feng Wuding also spoke up. Ling Han raised his eyes to look at Feng Wuding, and killing intent rose up in his heart. Feng Wuding provoked him time and time again, and in the end, he managed to survive. This wasn't because Ling Han was so easy to deal with, but rather because Lin Luo, Zhou Heng, and the others all thought that Feng Wuding had a bright future ahead of him, and would become one of the main forces fighting against Hysteria. They hoped that Ling Han could join forces with Feng Wuding, and had a strong hope for that. Due to his respect for Zhou Heng, Lin Luo, and the others, Ling Han had repeatedly held back. However, seeing Feng Wuding jump around like this, Ling Han finally lost his patience. Fuck. I don't care anymore. There's only one word for this die. Ling Han's index finger twitched slightly, but he did not make a move. With Zhou Heng and Zhu Hao present, he would definitely not be able to kill Feng Wuding. No matter what, he would definitely give them some face. In that case, he would just wait until later. In any case, there was still a lot of time. Chapter 2990-2990 Wall. Chapter 2990, 2990 Wall. 2990 Wall. Zhou Heng glanced at Ling Han, and a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Since we're not battling against Hysteria at the moment, playing some pranks shouldn't be an issue. In other words, the animosity between Ling Han and Golden Silk Moth was only a joke. If it was only a joke, then would there be any need for others to interfere? Feng Wuding wanted to dispute this, but he quickly realized that he couldn't find a good counterargument. 7th-tier elites were indestructible and undying, so was there any fear of Golden Silk Moth being pranked to death by Ling Han? Feng Wuding glowered at Ling Han before sweeping his gaze across Zhou Heng and Zhu Hao. He committed these 3 people to memory. When he advanced to the 7th tier, he would definitely make these people regret their decisions. He was the son of destiny. Disobeying him was equivalent to becoming enemies of the Genesis world. Just you wait and see. He humped in his mind. He turned around and quickly left. This was already the furthest that he could reach, so there wouldn't be any point in staying here for longer. 10,000 shadows hurriedly ran after Feng Wuding. Otherwise, if Ling Han, Zhu Hao, and Zhou Heng decided to play a prank on him as well, then wouldn't he be screwed? Anyhow, it wasn't like Golden Silk Moth would be killed, so he would just have to tolerate this for a while longer. Once Chongyan and the others heard about this, they would definitely come over to settle things with Ling Han. There was no need for 10,000 shadows to prematurely lead the charge. Lin Youlian, Xian Qihu, and Wu Haoyang also took their leave. Only Zhu Hao and Zhou Heng remained. We've reaped quite some benefits, so we need to enter seclusion for a while to stabilize our cultivation, Zhou Heng said. When the time comes, I'm afraid that Hysteria will attack us and start the battle again. See you later, Zhu Hao said with a nod. Ling Han, don't take the pranks too far, Zhou Heng warned before leaving with Zhu Hao. Ling Han glanced at the golden silkworm in his hand, and a smile involuntarily spread across his face. Since he couldn't kill this bug, he would naturally toy with it to his heart's content. Otherwise, what fun would it be? Ling Han, hurry up and release me! Golden Silk Moth bellowed. He was filled with despair. So many elites with a battle prowess at the 7th tier had come just then, yet they had still failed to set him free. So noisy! Ling Han unleashed a tad more power, causing the restriction around Golden Silk Moth to become more stable. Even his voice couldn't travel out now. Ling Han looked at the deep pit in front of him, but he didn't enter it. Instead, he went to another location, and also burrowed down. He wanted to personally witness the magnificent sight of fundamental particles crystallizing into a wall. In terms of deciding not to follow extermination, was there any need to explain this? Or perhaps he wanted to seek death? Ling Han burrowed into the earth, and after a short while, a wall appeared in front of him. It was very hard to describe this wall. At one moment it appeared red, yet at another moment, it suddenly appeared green. In the next moment, it would then appear multicolored. The wall continued to transform. Not only this, but its shape also continued to change. This wall didn't have a set appearance. This was a barrier formed by the fundamental particles, and it sealed the path to the dimensions below. Ling Han reached over to touch the wall. Golden Silk Moth couldn't help but snicker coldly when he saw this. He had already come here before, and he had also reached over to touch the wall of fundamental particles. However, he had immediately been sent flying. This was an overwhelming power, and it was as if all of the power from the Genesis world of the last era was concentrated in this one place. In fact, this power was so immense that perhaps only Hysteria would be able to resist it. Otherwise, even those at the peak stage of the 7th tier wouldn't be helpless before this wall. If this weren't the case, why would Lin Luo and the others have stopped here? When Ling Han's hand touched the wall, the fundamental particles would reply with a terrifying repulsive force. Since his physique wasn't indestructible and undying, Ling Han would definitely suffer a tremendous blow. It wouldn't be surprising if he suffered some minor wounds thither. As for Golden Silk Moth, he wouldn't be affected at all. Thus, not only would he be able to break free at that time, but there might even be an opportunity for him to counterattack and kill Ling Han. Brat, hurry up and touch it. Go on, touch it! Golden Silk Moth yelled in his mind. To have a 7th tier ultimate elite begging for someone to touch a wall in their mind. This was most likely a historical first. Ling Han's hand continued to creep forward. However, it suddenly paused just as it was about to make contact with the wall of fundamental particles. He was considering the potential dangers. When fundamental particles burned, they would form boundless karmic flames that approached the 7th tier in might. Thus, even Ling Han would have to unleash his full strength to resist it. Now that these fundamental particles had directly formed a wall, would their destructive power be even more petrifying? If he touched it, would he suffer any injuries? One had to keep in mind that Ling Han was still suppressing a 7th tier ultimate elite. Once he became wounded, he would no longer have the ability to suppress Golden Silk Moth. At that time, Golden Silk Moth would break free and turn the tables on him. He had to prepare for this possibility. Release Golden Silk Moth? Ling Han shook his head. He hadn't been joking when he said that he wanted to take Golden Silk Moth as a pet. He had been completely serious. He pondered for a moment before adding several layers of restrictions around Golden Silk Moth that would be effective for around 2 hours. After that, the restrictions would slowly weaken, at which time Golden Silk Moth would be able to break free. Ling Han casually tossed Golden Silk Moth aside. He then reached over to touch the wall again. Golden Silk Moth experienced a roller coaster of emotions, going between disappointment and anticipation. When he saw Ling Han finally reach over to touch the wall, his heart beat so fast that it was about to leap into his throat. Brat, you're done for! He wanted to directly shout this. Even though the restrictions around him would imprison him for 2 hours or so, Ling Han would need at least a few months to recover from the wounds that he was about to suffer. Golden Silk Moth had a ton of time. He was filled with sheer delight, and he felt as if his blood was pumping around his body in excitement. In fact, the only other time he had felt such excitement was probably when he advanced to the 7th tier. However, he almost bit his tongue off in shock in the next moment. What did he see? Not only was Ling Han not sent flying by the wall of fundamental particles, but his hand even sank inside the wall as if it weren't an impassable wall that could stop even 7th tier ultimate elites. It was as if the wall were made from water. Fuck! How is this possible? Golden Silk Moth's eyes widened in shock, and his mind went completely blank. To say nothing of him, even Ling Han was filled with surprise. He hadn't been overly ambitious, and he hadn't dreamed about passing through this wall of fundamental particles. After all, even Lin Luo and the others weren't able to do this. Moreover, his strength was nowhere near powerful enough, so it would naturally be impossible for him to do this anyway. Perhaps Ling Han would become powerful enough to blast this wall of fundamental particles apart when he advanced to the 6th or 7th tier. His aim was simply to touch the wall of fundamental particles to see whether he could master the remaining 2 particles. At that time, he would be able to ascend to the 7th tier in a single breath. Even though his power wouldn't increase by much, his physique would reach a state of invincibility, thus removing his current disadvantage. Unexpectedly, however, the wall of fundamental particles didn't unleash a formidable repulsive force against him. Instead, it became soft and gentle like water, allowing his hand to easily pass through. Was this a case of kindness before violence? Was the wall of fundamental particles waiting for him to completely enter it before unleashing the killing blow? Ling Han suddenly felt a little regret at this moment. He should have asked Zhou Heng about this wall of fundamental particles. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.